Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see what if Deku had Titan power and fell in love with Sasha, part 1. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Attack on Titan, Rise to Heroism by Anthony Tyler 9. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. You know the one thing about those with power in a world filled with superpowers. The saying that power corrupts is really telling. A young man's voice is heard as we find ourselves within a small park. There is a small boy with black hair with green highlights as he stands in front of another boy who is holding his left arm in a maroon shirt. Stop it, Kachan. Why you're hurting him? The boy called out, as the boy named Kachan walked over. You wanna pretend to be a hero? You don't stand a chance without a quirk. Deku, Kachan said, as he slammed his fist into his palm, causing a small explosion. It was terrifying to a smaller boy like this Deku child as he stood back with his arms out and tears brimming to the surface of his eyes. It was mere moments later in the slowly burning sun as the boy he protected was sniffling behind him that Deku stared into the sky with scuff marks on his clothes and body. There is a sad truth about the world of quirks. All men are not created equal, and it is because of this exact moment that I had trained myself in mind only to become a hero, just like All Might. A much taller boy who bore the same resemblance to the defeated child on the ground ran through an alleyway, about 6 years later. As the young man is running through the alleyway, he finds himself at an impasse as there is no way to escape from his pursuers. Turning around, he finds a 10-year-old Kachan as well as 10-year-old lackeys behind him as they stalk their way over to the trembling boy. Ah, what's this? Deku is trembling before me. Well, you should have never stated those words against me earlier today to make me want you dead. The boy said, as he revealed himself to be 6 years older Kachan. As the boy charged his quirk, he glared harshly at Deku as the boy prepared himself completely for a new fight to come about. The boy was not incredibly athletic as he pulled his arms up as he prepared for the beatdown to begin, and as soon as his former friends come at him, they use their quirks in order to beat him into submission. He is able to defeat the two lackeys, but it comes at the cost of taking his eyes off of the main threat of the bunch, the literal human with the power of a grenade, and possibly a nuke all within his hands. As he is sent flying back into the wall at the end of the alleyway, his head smacks the bricks behind him as his vision swims. Stumbling to stand back up, he finds himself getting into a stance that will protect his inner body as well as head. Well, Deku, you managed to defeat my lackeys. Well, you won't be capable of defeating me, so how about you listen to me for once and stop trying to become a hero? Bakugo cried out, as he launched his final attack on Izuku. The sounds of pain-filled cries as well as small explosions were heard by the people on the street before they moved on with their days. Just thinking it was a gang member showing someone their place to not step into their territory. After Bakugo gets his allies and leaves Izuku in the alleyway, the young man could only groan in pain as he felt his entire body in pain as he remembers the first time he ever saw a hero in action and wanted to become one, but it was on that very same day that his dreams were crushed by the very mother who had been overly kind to him. He's always smiling, no matter how bad things get. Do you think I can be a hero too? A younger Izuku asked his mother as the young woman held her hands over her mouth as she approached her son. As she ran to him and pulled him into a hug, she cried into her son's shoulder as she blamed herself for not being capable of giving him a quirk. And she apologizes for everything that went wrong, and what will go wrong in the future of the boy's life. Izuku groans a bit more as he pulls himself from the ground as he walks out of the alleyway. He shakes his head as he looks at the time. However, unlike so many universes where he was capable of leaving this alleyway with his life intact and return home to a mother who worries about him, this time he won't be as lucky. As soon as the young man leaves the small alley, he finds himself face to face with a tall man who looks like he hit the gym and never missed leg day. Hey there, Squirt, I heard from some kids down the way that you're quirkless, is that true? The man asked, as a sick smile came to his face. Izuku, who was completely taken aback by the man's seemingly kind nature but knew that the man's face was anything but nice, had taken a few steps back. Stay back. I have pea pepper spray. Izuku called out as he moved back into the alley. Ah, how cute. He thinks he can hurt me because he's quirkless. It's people like you that I despise the most. Time to end your pitiful existence. The man called out, as he ran after Izuku. The young man, who was admittedly still weak after his beatdown from Bakugo earlier that day, had struggled in the man's arms as the man had tried to kill him with strangulation. It was terrifying for the young man as he tried to reach for something to help himself, and with a little bit of luck he was capable of grabbing a pencil he had that had fallen out conveniently out of his backpack as he grabbed it and stabbed it into the man's left eye. As the man cried out in pain before pulling the pencil out of his eye, he looked at Izuku as the boy struggled to get some air back into his lungs after being strangled. "Well, you are just as vicious as that brat stated, no matter. My quirk will make sure that you are erased from our world itself. You won't be remembered, brat," the man said, activating his quirk. It was here that Izuku felt the ground beneath himself disappear as he fell into the ground as if he was in a cartoon. As he fell down the seemingly never-ending hole, he never noticed how he was slowly approaching the ground of a different world. And it was here that he felt his entire body become inflamed as he slowly passed out in the portal as he was spat out and smacked a wall on the other side. Once the portal closed, the young man was left into the world he was placed in as the sky was reaching the near end of the day. It was when he heard thumping in the world that stirred him from his slumber, and he immediately got up from the ground to look at his surroundings. Looking to the sky above himself, he found a very tall human looking down at him with a sickening smile on its face. "You sir, why you couldn't inform me as to where I am, right?" Izuku asked, in Japanese. And as soon as the hand comes moving towards him, Izuku gets the strange feeling to run away, and as soon as he notices how the smile seems to deepen as the monster tried to grab him, he moved out of the way. Where am I? What is going on?" Izuku called out in Japanese once more as he ran through the streets. As he ran through the streets, he came across two children who were trying their very best to lift a beam of wood from whoever was trapped beneath. And as soon as he tried to move over to them, he heard the telltale stomps of the monster that was chasing him over in this direction. Running over to the two who were struggling on lifting the wooden beam, he lightly tapped the girl on the shoulder as he motioned that he would help them as much as he could. So as the trio were attempting to lift the wooden beam, they managed to lift it a little bit as the woman underneath managed to struggle to pull herself out of the beam. Once the woman had managed to pull herself out from under the beam, she looked over at the new arrival as she pulled the boy with light green eyes and the black-eyed girl into a hug. Izuku stood off to the side a little awkwardly as he felt that him speaking would cause their moment to be interrupted. "Don't worry, children, Carla, I will save the day," a man with blonde hair and a slight stubble called out as he started to run towards the monster. As Izuku watched the man, he shook his head as he looked at the woman who was now looking at him. "Who are you, little guy? Can you tell me your name?" The woman, who he believes is named Carla, asked. Midoriya Izuku," the boy said, as the other two children looked at him confused as to why he answered with his last name first. "Are you from outside the walls?" Carla asked, incredulously as Izuku tried to think about it. For some reason though, he couldn't remember where he came from, except for his name as well as his age. For some reason that was all he could remember from his memories, but he shook his head at the woman as she smiled sadly at him. "I wish I could come with you all in order to escape, but my legs are broken. I can't walk right," Carla said, as Izuku tried to lift the woman on his back. The other children tried to help him out but were met with conflicting results. The boy on his right couldn't lift the woman since he didn't have enough muscle on his body, whilst the girl could as Izuku lightly tapped the boy's arm, causing him to look at him confusedly. "PP, please let me and your sister lift her," Izuku said, as the girl recognized his language. Carla seemingly noticed the language as the woman understood what he stated as she allowed Izuku to lift the woman with some slight issues as he carried her on his back. He was at least half her size in terms of height as he was only around 4 feet 11 in terms of height. As the small group started to escape from the smiling monster, the man returned this time as he carried Carla on his shoulders as he had the children follow after him. It wasn't until a few minutes later that they lost the giant beast as the man started to take notice of Izuku's presence with the group. "Well, I'll be you found another child, Carla. What happened to this one?" the man asked, as Carla gained a confused expression. "He is speaking in a language that sounds familiar. Izuku, could you speak to Hannes to see if he knows it?" Carla asked, As Izuku thought about it. Hajimamashite, Orwa watashi wa am Midori I Izuku dezu. Izuku said, as the man looked at him as he tried to acknowledge the language. I've never heard of that language before, but when we get out of here, we should inform him about our country's language of Eldian. I hope that he can learn it quickly so that he won't have any issues with speaking to Eren, Mikasa and Armin. Hannes said, as Izuku listened in on their conversation. He didn't know what they were saying, but he guesses that the names that the man dropped were the girl in front of him as well as the boy in front of him. So he will have to see if he can get their names right later on. Hopefully he can and will manage to get his job done right. Within the next hour or two the group of 5 managed to get into Wall Maria as they move towards the evacuation boats as Hannes manages to get Carla, Mikasa, Eren and Izuku onto the boat as they get on board as fast as possible. As the group were talking, Carla had taken it upon herself to start teaching Izuku some Eldian in order to get him a jump start on learning the language of their country. Whilst that is happening, loud cracks are heard in the air as smoke comes over the walls in the Shiganshina district if what Hannes told him was correct. On the other side of the wall, a group of garrison soldiers were shooting cannons at the Titans that were advancing on their current position. They were killing some of them, but many were getting past and brushing off their cannonballs that were smashing them to hell. But as they were shooting and reloading their cannons, they heard loud stomps coming from down the road, and that was when they found a very large Titan of about 15 meters in height as it was covered to the brim in armor. The group of garrison regiment soldiers were so confused that it took them a second to notice that the new Titan was getting into a sprinting stance. Once they were fully reloaded, they started to shoot at the approaching Titan as it ran towards the wall. A few shells came by the Titan as they hit another 13-meter-tall Titan in the chest, causing it to fly back, but one of the stray shots landed on the armor plating of the 15-meter-tall armored Titan as it moved faster. It was only a few minutes earlier that the gate was starting to close, and it was nearly closed entirely when the garrison soldiers had started to retreat through the wall as the armored Titan had broken through Wall Maria as well. Once it broke through the gate, he placed his foot down on the ground as he slid across the ground before stopping entirely. Looking around the area, it found that there was some garrison regiment soldiers staring at it with slight fear as well as trepidation as it turned around and disappeared back into the other side of the walls in a mass of steam. Only to be replaced with dozens of Titans making their way through the new breach of the wall, and Hannes could be seen standing against a clock tower as he stared on in horror. I sure hope that I get that raise soon, because this is some serious bullshit, Hannes said, as he started to flee the area. Comma 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 comma. It wasn't until the next day that Izuku woke up lying on his back as he thought about everything that happened in the last month since the destruction of Wall Maria, as Carla called it. The people of Shiganshina district were hiding within the district of Trost as they waited for their new homes to be made within the district. Izuku's speech of Eldian since the previous month he started had gotten better as he was now able to hold a conversation in Eldian for a small while before he would get self-conscious about it. Eren, Armin and Mikasa were walking with Armin's grandfather as they waited for their food rations in order to bring back to Carla. Once they all returned, albeit with Eren talking shit about some military policemen who were being complete dicks to the refugees of Shiganshina, they managed to get the food for their small group. Carla had recovered enough to which she could use her legs much better than 1 month prior, as her legs were simply sprained from the wood being on her. Had it been a bit higher, she would be bedridden as well as in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. So as the small group ate their dinner, Carla started to get Izuku to do his homework of Eldian language arts as the boy listened to her with complete trust. It was surprising for Carla to have a child other than Mikasa who was completely listening to her words as well as believing her completely. Izuku, what are you wishing to become in this country? Do you wish to become an artist? I have seen some of your art of superheroes that you've done. Carla asked with a slight teasing tone at the end. If it isn't bad, could I join the scouts? I know that it's dangerous. But if humanity loses hope, how will we survive? Izuku asked, as Carla listened to Izuku. Well, if Eren had put his words like that I would have been more compelled to allow him to go, but all he stated was I want to kill all the Titans and be free, Carla said, mimicking Eren's childlike voice for a bit, causing the boy to get a blush on his face. It was nice and calm for the end of their year, And Izuku was glad to be in a family again, especially one that was seemingly just like him. Aside from his black and green highlighted hair. How did your hair become green, Izuku? Eren asked, as Izuku shrugged. I think I had this hair color ever since I was conceived. Izuku said, as he thought about how he said the last word. Wow, Izuku's using big words now. He's going to become a massive strategist in the future, I can just tell. Armin called out, as Izuku slightly blushed before taking out a notebook that he began to draw in. The sad part about his drawings was that the lead and ink that he used would usually be smeared into his ending art, but it was still beautiful. Especially since he always drew heroes who were in costumes that depicted them in a stronger light. He didn't know why he was able to draw them this good, but he kept doing it as it helped make some money for the small group to live in Trost for a while. But like all good things, they must come to an end, since the government had stated that all able-bodied adults were to go outside the walls in order to reclaim Shiganshina as well as Wall Maria from the Titans. Carla was one of the many people who were taken away on the trip. And with that trip, none of the scouts as well as the 250,000 refugees who were a part of Shiganshina returned. All that remained was a smaller group of scouts from their regiment who managed to survive the ride back to Trost. It was here that Eren and Mikasa, along with Armin and Izuku, made their decision to join the military as well, for Izuku to do some artistry on the side to make sure that they could stay afloat. Looking off into the distance 3 years later, we find an Izuku who stands at a measly 5 feet 5 as he stares in front of himself as he heard the commander of the 104th Cadet Corps as he introduced himself. All right, cadets, my name is Keith Shaddis, and you will not remember that name because by the end of this training that lasts 3 goddamn years, you will all be wishing that you were killed by the Titans. Now who the fuck are you, private? Keith Shaddis called out a random cadet as the man continued down the lines to speak to random cadets. He even called out Armin as well as a smaller boy who was just slightly shorter than Izuku as they gave their reasons for being in the 104th Cadet Corps. Eventually the man reached Izuku as he saw the look in the boy's eyes. It was filled with both pain as well as complete determination as he stood in front of Izuku. Cadet, what is your name and where do you hail from? Keith Shaddis called out to Izuku. Placing his right hand over his chest, and his left behind his back, Izuku had gulped a little before speaking to the man. Izuku Midoriya, sir. I hail from Shiganshina, sir. Izuku called out, as Keith looked actually a little shocked. Why are you here, private? The man yelled in Izuku's face. I want to be able to help humanity bring its first win in 3 to 5 years, sir. Izuku said, as Keith smiled at Izuku. Congratulations, brat, you will be the broccoli for their meal. 6th row about face, Keith said, as Izuku felt his mind stop abruptly. Broccoli, why did he call me that? Izuku thought to himself as he turned himself around. The name calling as well as calling out cadets ended about an hour later as Keith told them that they should get their sleep soon since training will be much harsher than their lives before this place. So as the man left, everyone barring one Sasha Browse had left for the canteen in order to get some dinner before heading off to bed. Izuku though had stayed in the canteen as he drew some heroes that he briefly remembered from flashes of memories over the previous 3 years since the fall of Maria. Smiling to himself, he looks over at Eren, Mikasa and Armin as they smile at him as a singular thought comes to him. I hope to become a scout soon enough. I can't wait to become strong enough to handle life outside the walls. Izuku thought to himself as he ate his food. After the meeting with Keith Shaddis, the entire entourage of cadets went to the canteen as they prepared for their dinner of the day. The next morning was going to be filled with training from morning until night, so Izuku had plans of making sure that he would keep himself physically ready. As he left the canteen early that evening after having his own dinner early, he returned back to his cabin with some of the boys present inside as he went to a small table. He pulled out a small piece of paper as he drew some more heroic people that his mind supplied. He never knew who those people were, but he for some reason held them in high regards. The one he was currently drawing at the moment was a very tall man who had the body structure of an orca. His features were similar to that of an orca but more akin to a human since he was standing tall and intimidating. As Izuku continued to draw the man as intimidating as possible, he never heard the sounds of Eren and Armin coming inside the room behind him quietly. They both had noticed Izuku's love of drawing out superheroes as the boy was very lifelike even with only ink. They wished at this moment that the boy had some colors in order to color the images in since they were so lifelike to them. They found him drawing a new hero, but they were confused as to why he was more animal-like than the other ones. So any reason why you are making a whale, a hero? Armin asked, as Izuku shook his head. Because of the fact that some heroes can take different forms. I'm not sure how I know this, but this is my imagination. But there might be heroes out there who can look similar to aquatic life as well as mammal life on the earth. Izuku said, as he finished the picture. I see, well we should all get some sleep should we want to have Commander Shadis' wrath. Eren said, as the group had decided to go to bed for the night. Unaware of the fact that the man was looking through the window from an unknown angle as he watched the boy draw his picture. Boy could have become an artist in the capital and gained enough money to live on his own there but chooses to be a soldier. That is some serious thinking there. I will make sure that coming here is the best thing for him. Shadis said, as he walked away just quiet enough that nobody would hear him. Comma 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 comma. The next morning the cadets were running around the campsite as a warm-up for what they would be doing later on in that afternoon. Izuku was in the middle of the group as he had been more antsy about their training for the day and had been mentally preparing for it. By the time their warm-up run was over, the cadets moved over to a field which had Shadis standing in the middle of it. All right cadets, you will all be learning how to wield a blade against an opponent. And your partner's mission is to fully get the weapon out of your hands and into their own hands. Disarm your opponent and switch who has to attack with the bladed weapon, rinse and repeat until it is muscle memory. You never know when you will need training like this, Shadis said, as he walked around the place watching over the students. Once the students got into teams of two, Shadis kept his eye on Izuku as well as the partner he was given as the boy was staring at his own opponent of Jean. The boy ran towards Izuku as he half-assedly attacked the boy, and Izuku immediately placed the boy on the ground and ripped the weapon out of his hand. Jean was then placed on the defensive as Izuku attacked Jean as if it was a real thing that the young man had to learn how to defend against. Of course, Jean knew that this was training and that Izuku wouldn't hurt him too bad, but he would prefer that if Izuku didn't go at it as if he was literally trying to kill him. But even though Izuku was telegraphing his attack patterns, it was just too agile for Jean to get a hand on the boy's knife. As the two went back and forth, Shadis decided to give Jean the opponent of Marco, and moved Izuku over to Mikasa as the girl stared at Izuku. Giving the boy the blunted weapon that Mikasa had held, he then told the two to go at it, and the change was instant as both Izuku and Mikasa clashed in the middle as one tried to stab, and the other countered. Mikasa was physically stronger than Izuku, but the boy had the smaller frame which made countering him slightly difficult, but not enough. Izuku was still flipped onto the ground behind Mikasa as the girl shrugged her shoulders and helped Izuku get up from the ground. But now that Mikasa was the one with the blade, she held it in a reverse grip as Izuku stared at her movement, and as soon as she sprinted at him Izuku kept an eye on her body language. Shadis was watching from afar as he kept a close eye on Mikasa's body movements as well, and as soon as Mikasa made it into Izuku's close range, both Shadis and Mikasa were shocked as Izuku got into an unknown stance. Placing his arms out on both sides of himself as if opening himself up for an attack, he then thrusted his left palm into Mikasa's solar plexus, causing her to unwillingly let out a pain-filled gasp as Izuku then grabbed her right wrist and twisted hard and caused her to let go of her weapon as he then grabbed it and placed it against her neck in a movement that seemed so fast that both Shadis and Mikasa were completely taken aback. Once Izuku moved back, he apologized for his actions against her and wished to continue, and once that happened, both were going at it like they were actual fighting champions. The interaction between the two got everyone's attention and got them to try that much harder if the two were going non-stop at full power. It wasn't until lunch was called that everyone watched as Izuku collapsed to the ground in seemingly pain, but in actuality was just pure exhaustion. The boy had worn himself out fighting Mikasa, but he had earned something that would be crucial later on in his life that he would be sure to use against her if they fought again. He learned how she fought and would use that to his advantage whenever they would be pinned against one another for fights. But this would be a lesson for Mikasa at a later date in order to change her fighting style around Izuku, since the little rat is an analytical mastermind. By the time lunch was over, the group had deduced that they were going to do some martial arts training as they had moved back to their area without the blunted weapons. Shadis had then confirmed that they would be learning martial arts to take on their Titan enemies should they be without their ODM gear, but was ill-advised since it would mean their own demise. But it would be still useful since they would run into horrible humans in the future who would want nothing but their demise at their own hands. Once all the cadets were seen training with one another, Shadis watched from afar as they all physically trained against one another in the martial arts they were shown by instructors. As this was happening, Izuku was seen sparring against himself since he was trying to improve his own fighting style to the point there was no flaws. There was a slight sweat forming on his forehead as the young man was punching and kicking the air as fast as possible as well as hard. It wasn't much longer before someone came along to see how they would fare against him, and it was much easier for some of them since he hadn't used his attack style on some of them. Some were capable of fighting against him, but most were defeated unless they were Mikasa, Reiner, Bertolt and Annie. The others were still having trouble fighting Izuku's completely different fighting style, and Shadis believed that it was completely different from the fighting forms all Eldians are taught. Keeping this information to himself, he kept an eye on the cadets in order to oversee their training from a distance. By the time it was near dusk, the training of the students was called off as they would have more time in order to get better over the course of 3 years. As Izuku sat in the canteen, he ate some food that was slightly stale, but he could care less as he overheard Eren and Jean getting into an argument over something. Sighing to himself, he moved over towards Armin as he just started to eat, quietly appreciating the quiet nature of the boy. By the time Shadis had arrived, both boys were stopped from their impromptu fight as they would be given only one chance before having a punishment. Izuku would fall asleep that night as he thought about the future and what it would hold against the Titans in 3 years. 2 years later, Izuku was in the middle of training with his ODM gear as he tried to increase its effectiveness in battle when he was approached. "Hey Marco, what do you need?" the young man asked, as Marco smiled. "Hey, just came over here to see what you've been doing to your assigned ODM gear," Marco said, as Izuku smiled. "It's nothing. Just upgrading it with some small materials that were given to me. Other than drawing in lifelike images, I like to build things, and I was just trying to make my ODM gear that much more effective should I go face to face with a Titan," Izuku said, as Marco nodded. The two would converse about how they would take down a Titan should the two be placed in the same battlefield together. As it would turn out, Izuku wasn't really good with the ODM gear since he was more imbalanced than most people would believe. The young man was a total klutz as he would fall over the literal air itself sometimes and somehow get hurt. It was how he met a girl named Sarah Elisar in the nurse's cabin as the young man had somehow tripped over a small root hanging out from a tree and broke his arm. The girl had the dream of becoming a doctor similar akin to Grisha Jaeger, as the man was a literal legend when it came to modern medicine. The girl seemingly had a thing for Izuku, but from what Izuku had shown he wasn't in love with the girl, and the girl seemingly knew this but became friends with him. Izuku had the strangest relationship with her though. Sometimes he would blush when looking at her, and other times he would protect her from unwanted people like an overprotective big brother, even though Sarah was literally 3 years older than Izuku himself. Once the final day of training was there, the students were taken out into Titan country so that they could have their first encounter with a Titan to see how they would react. And the effect was immediate, as Izuku and most other capable fighters were actually able to go towards the Titans and kill some of them, as some others were fearful at first before entering the fray, not wanting to be left behind. And there was a small amount who were not wanting to fight Titans as they stayed near the commandant. Once that part of their training was over, Shadis had brought the group back to camp so that they could spend their last day training a bit with their ODM gear as well as physical fighting before their graduation. Izuku at this point was 14 years of age as he made it near 15, and he was so happy that his birthday was in the middle of July. Especially since graduation day for the 104th Cadet Corps was on his birthday specifically, as he was happy to be 15 now. For all those within the 104th Cadet Corps, you will hear your name and step up as you will be the top 10 best cadets from this year's cadets," Shadis said, as he prepared to use his voice to the maximum. "Number 10. Krista Lenz. Stand forward," Shadis said, as the girl stood forwards. Number 9. Sasha Browse. Stand forward, Shadis said once more as Sasha did what Krista did. Number 8. Connie Springer. Stand forward. Number 7. Marco Bott. Stand forward. Number 6. Jean Kirstein. Stand forward. Number 5. Eren Yeager. Stand forward. Number 4. Annie Leonhardt. Stand forward. Number 3. Berthold Hoover. Stand forward. Number 2. Rainer Braun. Stand forward. Number 1 and the most proficient of all the 104th Cadet Corps. Mikasa Ackerman. Stand forward, Keith Shadis called out, as Izuku stood next to Armin as he nodded at the placements of the top 10. I knew that I wouldn't make it, but I know that I am proficient in other areas that the top 10 aren't. Izuku muttered quietly to himself as Keith spoke up. These are the top 10 of this year's Cadet Corps. These are the people you strive to become similar to in skill as well as experience as you learn how to become better soldiers. As of now the 104th Cadet Corps is now disbanded. Be prepared for your next life as soldiers for humanity, Keith said, as everyone saluted to the man as they all walked towards the canteen to celebrate. Izuku was celebrating on his own as he walked around the canteen in the dark and cool night. He was looking at the stars as he thought about his life up until this point in his life. He smiled as he watched some meteors blast past the moon as he looked further out into the sky as if he was searching for the meaning of life. He was completely unaware of who was coming up behind himself as he thought to himself, appreciating the silent night. Well, what do we have here? What are you doing out here, Izuku-kun? A feminine voice asked, as Izuku turned around to find Sasha Browse standing behind himself. Hey Sasha, how are you doing? Izuku asked, as the girl smiled at him. I wanted to come see where you were. Everyone was celebrating, meanwhile you were out here and not enjoying the free food. The girl said, as Izuku chuckled at her antics. You remember how we all started our training 3 years ago, especially with our introductions? Izuku questioned as the girl thought about it. Can't say I do. What do you remember? Sasha asked, as she sat down on the step next to Izuku. I remember how you were eating a potato during roll call, and Shadis Dancho walked over to you and asked you for an introduction. Izuku said, chuckling slightly. Wah, I thought everyone forgot about that. ? Sasha called out, as tears comically came flowing out of her eyes. Don't worry, I think that certain people remember that day, but I will keep it a secret from others. Izuku said, as the girl sighed in relief. I thought you were a monster when you brought that up, Izuku-kun. Sasha said, as she let out a huff of air. I remember my first time trying to use the ODM gear for the first time. I guess you can laugh at me for that. Especially since my first time I was able to balance perfectly on it, but then moments later when we were training with it in the trees surrounding the camp, I nearly hit a tree. Izuku said, as Sasha laughed out loud at that. They sat there in the cool night air as they stargazed with one another as Izuku looked at Sasha and blushed slightly when he saw that she was only wearing the undershirt of her uniform. What happened to your uniform jacket? Izuku asked, stuttering a little as the girl looked at him. It got too hot inside the canteen, and I decided to take off my jacket and come out here to find you. You have this calming aura about you. I can definitely see animals coming over to you. Especially a bird to turn that bush of a head you got that you call hair into a nest. Sasha said, as she looked at him with a smirk. Well, at least what you said actually had happened to me. Izuku said, as Sasha looked at him in awe. Wait, a bird already tried to make a nest out of that bush you call hair? She asked, as Izuku delved onto that story to her for a few minutes. Wow, I never knew that a small bird tried to do that to your hair. Did it ever leave? Sasha asked, as Izuku shook his head showing the small nest with eggs. Wow, she laid her eggs in your hair? Sasha asked, as Izuku nodded. I have to put them in a high spot where I usually sleep so that she doesn't get lost trying to find me. Izuku said, pulling the nest out and replacing it with a cut portion of his hair before leaving to the cabins. Sasha had followed Izuku as he placed it where he usually slept in the boys' cabin as they watched the bird come back as she looked at the makeshift hair pile that provided warmth to her eggs. She chirped as she laid on her eggs once more as Izuku scratched her neck softly as the bird softly chirped from the attention he gave. Wow, with how calm you are towards animals, I'd think you were some kinds of animal guru. Sasha said, chuckling as Izuku nodded. Leaving the bird in the little nest by the window, Izuku and Sasha left the mother bird to tend to her unborn children as they walked around the camp. We have to prepare for tomorrow. We have to see what the garrison regiment will be placing us so we can see what it's like to work under their forces. At least until we choose our very own regiment to join. Speaking of which regiment are you choosing? Izuku asked, as Sasha thought about it. Eren's speech about the scouts really made it a no-brainer. I am going to join the scouts in order to reclaim our lost land so I can have all the food I can eat. Sasha said, as Izuku chuckled before looking at how she was still taller than he was. 3 years and I still am not as tall as you. Izuku grumbled as the girl laughed. Yeah, how tall were you when we first were introduced to one another? Sasha asked, as Izuku mentioned his pitiful 5-foot height at the time. Well, at least you look adorable right now. Seeing you complain about your height makes it funnier. Sasha said, as Izuku lightly smacks her arm with a pout. Well, I'm going to head to bed. I want to get some sleep before we will be worked to the bone tomorrow. Izuku said, as he walked over to the new cabins for the graduates. Comma 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 comma. It was the next morning as the cadets were introduced to high-ranking members of the garrison regiment as they taught all the cadets how to clean the cannons on top of the walls. They also informed them how to keep an eye on the horizon for any new titans that might arrive since they needed to be prepared for the return of the Colossal Titan and Armored Titans if they show up again. Izuku was on the wall as he was clearing up the insides of the cannons so that they could be used against the titans and not be jamming up. He was in the middle of cleaning another cannon when he was approached by Ren and the others, plus Sasha looking like she stole something from the garrison regiment already. What is going on? Izuku asked, as the group talked about their dreams as well as the regiment they wished to go to. Izuku smiled as Mina, Thomas, Connie, and Eren stated where they wanted to go, and it even got a little emotional as Mina and Thomas both stated that they wanted to go to the scouts with Eren. That was the time that Sasha pulled out some meat from inside her jacket as she started to drool. Hey guys, look what I found in the meat locker of the garrison regiment. Sasha asked, as she pulled it out. Shaking his head, Izuku told them off as Connie spoke up about what the girl said, being stupid, before asking to have a slice of it. Leave it up to the 2 dumbest cadets of our year to battle it out for number 1 dumbest cadet. Izuku said, as Connie actually spoke up. Yeah, I really hate when the dumb people are acting all smart and everything. The boy said, as Izuku looked at him pointedly. What? So you want to talk shit about yourself? Eren teased as Connie screamed at him. It was a really fun time for them all as Izuku got back to cleaning the cannons again just to be sure that they were ready for use. Hey guys, we should probably get to work, don't want the garrison to be on our asses. Thomas said, as the group got back to work. While that was happening, Eren was about to jinx them all with what he was thinking in his mind. So as Izuku was clearing out the cannon of debris as well as gunpowder that was a bitch to clean out, he heard a familiar lightning strike come from behind himself. Turning around, he saw that the Colossal Titan had appeared in front of them as he looked incredibly intimidating now that he was so close. But because of the intimidation display he caused steam to blast everyone off the top of the wall as he kicked a hole into the wall at the gate. As Izuku fell towards the ground, he launched his ODM gears anchor into the wall as he skidded to a stop a few meters above the hole. What in the hell? Izuku asked, as the boy looked back up at the wall as he saw Eren flying towards the Colossal Titan in fury. Don't just stand there, we need to take him down. He's the only one who can take down the walls, get him before he can escape. Eren called out, as Izuku noticed some titans getting in through the hole in the wall. Jumping from the safety of the height he was standing on the wall, he moved towards one of the buildings near the hole that wasn't destroyed in the chaos of the Colossal Titan's attack. Izuku watched as 2 titans of at least 10 meters up to 15 meters moved towards his location with their scary smiles on their faces. Preparing himself for a fight against the titans coming in, he was backed up by Connie and Sasha as they landed next to him. Pulling out his blades, He watched as Sasha and Connie did the same as they ran towards the Titans with him as he jumped in the air. Using the ODM gear to fly around a moving target, Izuku was much more concerned about his own safety, as the Titan he was targeting the nape of would constantly turn its eyes as well as body to look at him. He flew around as he distracted it from Connie and Sasha as they moved behind it each time Izuku moved to grab its nape, and as soon as the Titan flew towards him with a massive jump, the young man had used some gas in order to dodge the strike as he called out to Sasha and Connie as he focused on the next one moving towards the city. Moving as fast as possible, he managed to catch up with the Titan as he attached his anchor onto its nape before accelerating himself to it and slicing it apart. As soon as that was completed, Izuku turned around to see what became of Sasha and Connie and found them flying over to him with Eren not far behind. "Are you all right, Izuku?" Eren called out, as he landed near Izuku. The boy jumped off the back of the disintegrating Titan as he moved closer to Eren as he made a comment. 3 years of training build up to this. "I call bullshit," Izuku said, as he groaned into Eren's shoulder. As the cadets of the 104th had arrived at the main base of operations within Trost, they found Captain Kitzwoerman, who was telling them what their mission was. "All right, cadets, your mission is to buy time for all the civilians to escape into Walrose. You are to lay down your lives in order to protect them. As of right now, their lives are worth more than your own. Make sure that you listen to your squad leaders and follow directions. Because it might be a life or death decision that you make," Kitz said, as he left the group to get their refills on their gear. Izuku was moving through the squads that gathered together as he collected his gear and refilled on his gas and blades. He was listening to all the silence within the base, with the chaos outside of the base from all the Titans battling it out with the Colossal Titan squad who were holding them back. He was approached by someone from his left as he saw that it was Sasha once again, as the girl looked at him with a fearful gaze. Are we all really going to lay our lives down for the civilians like this? I really don't want to die," Sasha said, for once not looking carefree. Izuku stood up as he fixed his gear and moved over to her and pulling her into a hug as he allowed her to cry in his chest. He knew that there was nothing to say. He just held her in his arms and rubbed her back as he whispered sweet nothings into her ear to calm her down. This continued for a few minutes until Izuku heard his name being assigned as the squad leader of himself, Connie Springer, Ymir and Krista Lenz. "I got to go, Sasha, but how about when we reclaim Trost back from the Titans, because I know we can, we just hang out and stargaze for a while?" Izuku asked, as Sasha thought about it. "Sure thing, Izuku. Can I stay like this for a little bit longer?" she asked, as Izuku chuckled before patting her head. "Don't worry, I won't die. We can do this again after our mission is complete," Izuku said, as he smiled at her as she looked up to him. Meeting his gaze, she couldn't help but smile as well as she hugged him once more, causing him to blush slightly as he felt her squeeze herself a little more this time. "Stay safe, I will too," Sasha said, before leaving to her own squad. Shaking his head, he turned around to see a smirking Connie, a smiling Ymir, and a devilishly beautiful girl shaking her head at him. "What?" Izuku asked, as they started to leave. What did I do?" Izuku called out, running after them. As Izuku stood on one of the buildings near the rearguard positions, he looked over his gear as he overheard Ymir and Connie arguing with one another. "I swear you just don't know when to stop talking shit about us," Connie growled out, as Ymir smirked at him. "I know that you are short for a reason, but didn't think it was to show how small your brain was," the girl said, as Izuku shook his head. "Please stop fighting. If you don't stop, I will have to leave you, Ymir," Krista said, as Ymir immediately reined herself in. Izuku chuckled at their conversation as he and Connie just ran out in order to take the fight to the Titans after hearing the high-ranking garrison soldier inform them to get the Titans that are getting too close to the rear of Trost. As the group had moved throughout the entire small area of Trost, they had taken down a collective amount of 6 Titans. Some were taken out by Izuku, who had cut through them all, and some were killed by Connie or Ymir. Making their way to where the vanguard was located, they increased their pace as they ran into Squad Jaeger as they were having some slight trouble with a particular two titans. Izuku sent Connie over to the other side of the Titan as he attached his anchors to the shoulder blade of the Titan before having Connie do the same, and as soon as they reached the same elevation, they pulled themselves down to slice two opposing parts of the arm muscles. As soon as the arms had fallen down from where they were reaching out from both cadets, Thomas had flown in and managed to slice through the nape of the Titan's neck before they all moved on to the smaller one and killed it easily. "Thanks for the help, Midoriya, we can take care of ourselves now," Eren said, before leading his group away. Moving through the district, Izuku and company had run into their own sets of titans as they kept growing in numbers over the day, and they soon came across an abnormal titan who moved not like normal titans. It was attracted to the humans that were gathered in the back of the district but was caught in the middle of the district near the giant boulder. Izuku used his gas enough to increase his speed in order to catch up to the titan, and as this was happening, Ymir had pulled up a stun gun in order to blind the titan for him to attack it. Flying behind the titan, he started to ascend to the sky in order to gain momentum in order to kill it, and that was when Ymir blinded the titan, allowing him time in order to fall down and slice its nape. Once that was completed, Izuku had made sure to move back to the others, as they watched the main base of operations get taken down in one fell swoop. Breathing heavily, they all landed on one of the buildings to check their supplies. At the moment, Izuku was still good with 2 more gas canisters on his back whilst everyone else were running dry. "Go see how the evacuation is going. We will keep an eye on things here," Ymir said, as Izuku prepared to leave before they heard a voice nearby. "Ah, wait, who was that?" Ymir called out, as Izuku immediately recognized the voice. "That's Armin, let's go see what happened," Izuku called out, leading the group to where he heard the voice come from. It wasn't much longer before the squad had arrived to where Armin was, as he was looking completely broken and wasn't paying anyone any attention. "Armin, are you all right?" Connie asked, as the boy just remained silent. "Where's Eren and the others?" Krista asked, as the boy violently flinched. Izuku understood what that meant immediately as he placed a hand on the girl's shoulder as she looked at him. Shaking his head, the girl realized what had happened and placed a hand over her mouth as she thought about all the deaths that happened. "Hey, what are you all doing down there? You will get the Titans to come over to you all," a familiar voice called out, landing next to Izuku. Looking to his right, he found Reiner as the young man was looking at everyone with concern as well as worry. "Armin is the only one left from Squad Jaeger. I believe everyone in his squad was wiped out," Izuku said, as everyone gained a sad expression on their faces. As they all let out a small huff of air, they shook their heads as Izuku stood back up before checking his gear once more as he walked over to the edge of the building. "Where are you going?" Bertolt asked, as Izuku looked back at him. "Going to check on the evacuation. They should have already evacuated everyone by now. You're welcome to join me on the way there to see what happened," Izuku said, taking off into the distance. He was soon followed by Annie and Bertolt as Reiner had opted to stay near everyone else on the rooftop as Izuku looks out to the groups that are shooting green flares in need of assistance. Arriving at the first green signal flare, Izuku found some garrison regiment soldiers attempting to make a small base in order to resupply those who were still fighting. Helping the garrison regiment soldier, they thanked him for his help as he moved on to the next one. He was beginning to run low on gas and blades when he found himself saving Marco Bot from being Titan food. Jumping in the way of a Titan's attack, Izuku slammed his foot into the eye of the Titan, causing it to flinch slightly away from the young man, changing his blades and gas. But that was all the time needed for it to grab Izuku immediately as he ran out of gas not that high above it. Marco called out his name as Izuku looked at the jaws of death that came for him, but just in the nick of time, Annie had come in and killed the Titan, causing it to drop him from its grasp. Flying around the Titan's falling body and grabbing the short boy, she pulled him close before tossing him onto the rooftop. "Keep an eye out on your shit. We don't need you to run out right now," Annie said, as Izuku nodded before standing back up on the roof. "If it's any use to you, take some of the gas that I have. It won't be much, but I need to make sure that the garrison aren't wiped out from here. Could you two help me?" Marco asked, looking to Izuku, Annie and Bertolt. "I am on my way to getting to the rearguard in order to see what happened. Annie and Bertolt will come with you though," Izuku said, as both nodded. As soon as both squads had left, Izuku looked at how many blades he had left. Only one set of blades left, need to make them count and find Mikasa and the others. Izuku said, before taking off towards the rearguard positions. He would make it about 15 meters away from the rearguard position when he was ambushed by two titans as he flew around them both in order to try and kill them both. But just as he was flying around, a third titan had jumped from the air and grabbed at him from the air. As he was in an aerial spin trying to get away from the two behind him, he had completely missed the one grabbing at him. So by the time he had been grabbed once again, he felt something snap inside his left arm before he was lifted by said arm to the titan's face. Looking at it with a fierce expression on his face, he pointed his left blade at it before throwing his blade at its face, slicing through one of its eyes. Once the blade caused it to let go of the young man, Izuku used his one good arm to switch blades to his right hand as he flew towards it in order to try and slice the nape with the blade itself. But just as fast as he tried to get behind it, the very same titan had turned its head to look at him in the face before opening its mouth and slamming them shut, accidentally slicing through his left arm at the elbow. Gyaha! Izuku screamed as the titan started to swallow him into itself. As he fell into the stomach of the titan, he felt himself slowly from the feet start to be covered in a weird mucus. But as he struggled to move about the watery gravesite for himself, he growled out his anger towards this situation. Damn it, I need to get to those at the rearguard. I won't let this be the end. Izuku growled out before passing out due to the excessive heat inside the beast's stomach. Unknown to him, his body was about to go a metamorphosis in order to save the day from any and all harm for the rest of the day. As he was slowly seeping into the fluid so that it could completely envelope him, his body started to spark with a yellowish gold color before everything went black for him. The last thing he could feel from himself was the simple fact that he felt much taller than he used to be. Izuku felt nothing but just nothing and a massive heat surrounding his body. He couldn't wake up from this dream he was having. He was walking around Trost as if in search of something to prevent the titans from even entering the city anymore. And as soon as he reached a portion of the city where a large boulder was sitting without even being able to be moved by the humans below, he found some humans looking at him in both fear and slight awe. He saw a specific human looking at him with clear confusion as well as slight fear as Izuku looked towards them as he walked over to inspect them. Once he was close enough to inspect them all, he watched as some of them were preparing to fight him if anything got too dangerous. Stopping short of them all, Izuku used his new giant form's arm and lifted it to point at the brown-haired girl who was gawking at him right next to a small bald young man. The girl pointed to herself as she used her ODM gear to get to the giant in front of them as soon as the titan had nodded at the girl pointing at herself. Once the girl was in front of his face, Izuku took in her features, and he saw that the girl was Sasha from the memories he saw when he was resting inside the nape of this creature's neck. Pointing at the nape of his neck, he tried to pull something away from the nape so that the girl could pull him out. It was too hot for him to handle being in there. Sasha, noticing what he was mentioning, moved over to right behind his nape as she watched as the titan was clearly trying to pull the armor from around the nape with some struggles. Using her blades to slice into the clear flesh between the armor, it allowed Izuku to pull apart the nape, allowing him to breathe some nice fresh air as he heard Sasha speaking to him. Izuku, what in the hell is this? Why didn't you tell anyone that you were the armored titan? ? Quote. Sasha scolded as Izuku managed to pull his face from the muscle fibers holding him to the spinal bones of the titan. I didn't know this would happen. I'm supposed to be dead, Izuku said, as the girl stared at him. How would you be dead? Sasha yelled at him as she pulled him out of the muscle fibers. As soon as he was disconnected from the fibers, they watched as the titan form had slowly fallen to the ground as it was disintegrating from existence. At a safe location from the Titan's hands, Izuku and Sasha looked at one another as they looked for those who were nearby to see Izuku's Titan form. As soon as it was shown that Izuku was more docile than the original armored Titan was, Sasha immediately realized that he wasn't the armored Titan that wanted the destruction of humanity. How are you going to tell the MP's scouts, as well as the garrison, that you are here to help? You are basically a wanted criminal. Sasha questioned as Izuku sat there gathering his air. I don't know, B, but we need to find A, Armin and the others. T, they will know W what to do, and I need to gather some strength. I have a plan to stop the T-Titans from entering the city again. Izuku said, as Sasha nodded her head, picking up the boy and placing him on her back. Just hang on tight, I will get you to some of the others who can do some first aid on you. Sasha said, as Izuku passed out again on her back. Once the girl arrived at some of the people who saw the armored titan and watched it kill some titans who were nearby, they saw Sasha return to them after the armored titan had essentially allowed Sasha to kill it. Sasha, get away from him. W, where did Izuku come from anyway? Connie screamed at her as the girl placed Izuku on the rooftop. I don't have time for this, Connie, we need to get his temperature back down to normal heights. He's too hot, Sasha said, as she pulled out some cold wet rags. She got on the way to the building from the small watering hole nearby. As she started to cool Izuku's forehead, Bertolt had walked over as he stared at Izuku with complete confusion as well as trepidation. If there was another armored titan, would that mean that there could be another colossal titan within the walls as well? Thinking about taking Izuku to the homeland where he and Reiner had come from earlier in their youth, he decided to keep Izuku safe. Well, we should probably get to the others soon, so one of you hold Izuku, we need to change locations. Bertolt said, as he ran off to find some other cadets. Once Bertolt had left, Connie watched as Izuku's eyes were opened up again as he looked around the area for the boulder that he needed to move to the hole in the wall. Hey, stay on the ground, Izuku. I don't know what in the hell happened to you to make you a titan, but you need to inform us about what happened. Connie said, as Izuku struggled to get out of the boy's grip. I was on my way to see what the H hold up on the E evacuation was. I was ambushed by TH3 Titans and had little T to no gas left in A as I tried to take on of the Titans out, the T3rd arrived and ate me. Izuku said, as Sasha looked at Izuku to see if he was feeling something akin to disgust. What are you even trying to do? You just got out of that Titan skin as if it was a second body. Connie exclaimed as Izuku looked at his hand before looking at Sasha's blades. I need to plug up TH the wall. T to stop the influx of T-Titans. Izuku said, as he stood up and grabbed Sasha's blade and sliced his hand, causing a massive spike in electricity to surround him. As he jumped from the rooftop, as both friends of Izuku had watched in awe as well as fear, they watched as his Titan had formed from the feet first as it grew in height up to what he would look like as a Titan. By the time they saw his nape forming around him, they saw that he was encasing himself in a weird kind of crystal to protect him from any and all harm. Once he landed on the ground, he forced himself to take control of the Titan with his mental actions so that the Titan would do as he asked. As his Titan form made its way over to the giant boulder, every single person who was killing Titans were alerted to his arrival, and once the garrison regiment members who were arriving on the scene, they found Izuku walking towards the giant boulder. What in the hell is that Titan doing? Why is it not destroying the wall? One of the garrison soldiers called out, confused. That armored Titan isn't the original. It's a variant of it, and it's thankfully on our side. Sasha and Connie called out as they land next to the garrison soldiers. What do you mean it's on our side? It's one of the monsters that destroyed Wall Maria. They called at the two cadets. Well, look at its hair. It's green, not yellowish tan. Connie said, remembering Eren stating that the armored Titan's hair color was similar to Reiner's hair color. If what you two say is true, why is this only coming to light now? The calmer garrison soldier asked, as the two cadets looked at one another before speaking. We only heard about it from the source. He's our friend from the cadet corps. He had no clue about these powers he has. Just that he can use them. Besides, he is going to help us in reclaiming the district from the Titans. Just assist him in getting the boulder over to the hole in the wall. Connie called out, pulling his blades out and running towards the armored Titan. As the garrison with the assistance of Connie and Sasha took down Titans that got in Izuku's way down, they watched as his Titan had managed to lift the boulder without much trouble as it began its way over to the hole in the massive wall. Unknown to them, on the other side of the district, another Rouge Titan was making waves against some of the more aggressive Titans over near the main base of Trost district. The small group consisting of 3 members of the garrison and 2 cadets of the 104th Cadet Corps, they had started to take down each and every Titan in the area to provide a way to get Izuku to the entrance without any Titans trying to disturb him from his mission. By the time he was right in front of the hole in the wall, they had garnered some attention from the still-living vanguard as they stared at the group in confusion. They watched as the Titan had crouched slightly in order to close the wall up, and as soon as it was in position it shifted slightly and slammed the boulder into the wall, sealing it up forever. With that hole done and over with, the garrison as well as the cadets in the area had looked worse for wear. But at the same time, they were happy since this would mark the first win against the Titans since the last 100 years since they first appeared. As this happened, Izuku's Titan form had started to teeter off balance as it collapsed to the ground in exhaustion and started to slowly dissipate from existence, allowing the young man to escape from the crystal that held him inside safe and sound. Once free from the crystal, he had looked around to find some garrison members staring at him with slight fear as well as problematic expressions. Thinking quickly and as fast as he could, he stumbled off the Titan carcass as he fell onto the ground with Sasha running towards him. Cough. A little help here? Izuku asked, before he felt himself losing consciousness. As the garrison regiment members had stared at the scene before themselves, they looked at one another before walking over to the duo and kneeling towards Izuku and Sasha. Can you tell us that you are firmly on the side of humanity? The leading member asked, as Izuku regained consciousness for this moment in time to hear the question. I've always sided with life. I don't want humanity to die off yet. We haven't shown our true potential. Izuku mumbled before passing out, completely everything going black. As Izuku and his Titan form was being dealt with on the other side of the district, Mikasa and the others were looking at the Rouge Titan as it took down Titan after Titan. He was a literal monster in Titan skin as he took down each and every Titan that stood in his way of destruction. He had even found a Titan that had killed Thomas as it ran over to it and bit into the nape of the neck, repairing some of its broken bones in its ribs before swinging the Titan in its mouth and smashing a smaller Titan into red paste on the ground before swinging the other Titan into another group of 3 into a building and killing all 3. All of this happened before the Titan itself roared out its last breath and collapsed to the ground, seemingly dead. Well, look at that. It seems like our ticket to saving the entire world has just died. Let's get out of here, Jean said, as he walked away. But a gasp from Mikasa had caused him to turn around, and the group had noticed that someone was coming out of the nape of the Titan that had just died. As it was soon revealed to be Eren Yeager from the 104th Cadet Corps, everyone looked at each other as they thought about what had happened today. It was also at this point in time they heard a massive explosion near the entrance of Trost District's giant boulder. Wait, what? Looking at the entrance, they found another Titan looking very similar to the armored Titan, leaning over exhausted before collapsing to the ground. Looking at one another, they left Mikasa and Armin with Jean at the Trost headquarters in order to see what happened over on the other side of Trost. As Jean and Armin helped Mikasa and Eren get inside the walls, the remaining group of Annie, Reiner and Bertolt had flown over towards the entrance, where they found some members of the 104th Cadet Corps who couldn't get to Trost headquarters without running on the ground below. They were looking at a scene before them. Sasha was hugging Izuku close to her body as she rubbed his hair. The boy had some weird markings on his eyes as well as arms, as the young man was seemingly worse for wear as Sasha was using wet rags in order to cool him down. What is going on here? Reiner asked, as some garrison regiment members informed the trio about the situation. Apparently Izuku had a Titan form akin to the armored Titan itself and had managed to plug up the wall without much effort, but it left him severely exhausted to the point he was barely coherent. Informing the cadets to leave and let Izuku be taken into the main headquarters of the garrison, Sasha was only allowed to be near Izuku since the young man responded better to her than most others. Whilst that happened, on the other side of the wall, Jean, Armin and Mikasa were guarding Eren as the young man was being put up on trial by Kits Woerman, as he was severely afraid about a young man like Eren being able to assume a Titan form. As they were arguing about whether Eren and his friends were allies to humanity, they were shot at by a cannon, allowing Eren to use his transformation once more to protect his friends as they planned a way to escape from the area. But ultimately were saved by the garrison regiment's one leader Pixis, as the man had arrived just in time to stop Kits from killing potential allies for the reclamation of Wall Maria and Shiganshina district. Once they were brought away from the area in order to talk to the leader of the garrison, the man informed them about the fact that they wouldn't need Eren's Titan form in order to reclaim Trost, as it was already done earlier that day. The trio were wondering how the hole in Trost district's wall was completely covered in just one day, but Pixis had kept quiet about it. So as the small group relaxed for a while, they had met some more garrison members moving an unconscious Izuku over to a holding cell. Running over to the garrison members, they were informed that Izuku had managed to transform into a Titan as well and will be put up for trial in order to see if he could assist mankind or be sentenced to death. 2. Izuku would wake up a few hours later as he looked at his surroundings in order to see what had happened. He couldn't remember what had happened before closing the hole in Trost district's wall, and he couldn't help but feel like he wasn't alone in the room he was located in. Opening his eyes, he looked around the desolate area, and as soon as he sat upright, he soon found the reason why it was so desolate. He was in a holding cell and two men were waiting outside of the holding cell itself. "Hello there, Midoriya Izuku. My name is Erwin Smith, and this is Captain Levi. We have so many questions to ask you about your presence in this world. I hope you can answer any and all questions I have," Erwin Smith stated as Izuku stared at both men with confusion. "What?" Izuku asked, before passing out again. As Izuku took in the words of both Commander Erwin and Captain Levi in front of himself, he had sat there in the holding cell looking morbidly confused. What are you talking about?" Izuku asked, as both men looked to one another before nodding. "Well, from what we had heard from certain sources, you had become an armored Titan, although your form is far different from the armored Titan that destroyed the wall around 5 years ago. We want to see the full extent of your powers as a Titan shifter, and possibly regain the land that we had lost due to the Titans," Erwin said, as Izuku nodded. "That would be much more ideal. I would certainly hope that I can assist you all in this endeavor," Izuku said, as Captain Levi nodded along. "You will be placed in my squad as well as your cadet in arms Eren Jaeger. You will be watched by my squad whilst Eren will be watched by my privately at all times. Should he become a Titan and attack us, I would have full clearance to take you both out," Levi said, as Izuku nodded his head. "That is if we are able to get you away from the prying hands of the military police and the garrison regiment," Erwin said, as Izuku looked confused at the man. "What are you talking about?" Izuku questioned as Erwin spoke up. "The military police believe you to be a danger to us all because your form is similar to the armored Titan from 5 years in the past. They still believe that you are an enemy of humanity and are just biding your time in order to break through the walls again," Erwin said, as Izuku slumped into his bed. "I don't wish ill will upon humanity, all I want to do is help. I don't even know how I even manifested these powers. All I remember was being consumed by a Titan before feeling electricity all around my body. Everything was black before I heard Sasha talking to me again," Izuku muttered to himself as both Erwin and Levi looked at one another. "You're telling us that this Sasha had managed to bring you to the surface from your Titan form?" Levi asked, as Izuku thought about his answer before nodding. "Well, congratulations, kid, you might just be able to be rescued from death," Erwin said, as Izuku gained a comical look on his face of pure shock. It was a few hours later that Izuku found himself being pushed through the halls by 2 military police regiment officers as they glared harshly at him. "You should have died in the battle for Trost. You damn traitor," the officers said, as Izuku huffed before they arrived in a courtroom. Being pushed inside, Izuku walked forwards without even trying to defend himself from them as he saw a large pole object in the middle of the room and immediately knelt next to it as the military police officers looked on in shock at how cooperative he was. Snapping out of it, they placed the metal bar through the cuff links as Izuku instinctively pulled on the chains a little, seeing that they were tight on him. Looking around, he found the whole room was filled with militaristic leaders of each regiment, but the one he was looking at the most was a man behind a podium holding a hammer in his left hand. "All right, let's get this over with. We have another Titan shifter in the other room awaiting trial. So this is the trial of Izuku Midoriya. All who are present, even the convict, please agree with what has been stated," the old man said, as everyone present gave hums of approval. Alright, so let's get this party started. My name is Darius Zackley, and I am the current judge for if whether or not Izuku Midoriya should be killed. Can we have our prosecutors give their reasons for wanting him either dead or alive? Zackley asked. Yes sir, my name is Nile, and it is within my reason that we are to conduct experiments on Izuku Midoriya, finding his true nature before disposing of him later on once we have all the answers we require from the young man. That is all, Nile said, as everyone erupted into talks. Alright, human experimentation before killing him off when you can't get anything else from him. What can the scouts do that will either provide life or death to our defendant? Zackley asked, as he looked at Erwin Smith. My name is Erwin Smith, of the Scout Regiment. And it is within my thoughts as well as goals that we use Izuku Midoriya's armored Titan powers to reclaim land that was previously lost to us by the power of Titans. We will enter the area within Wall Maria and clear out as many Titans that are there before arriving at Wall Maria, where we will use the other Titan shifter to plug up the walls. Once that is complete, we will explore outside of the walls later on and reclaim land that was previously lost to us. That is all, sirs, Erwin said, as Zackley nodded his head along. How does the Wall religion perceive this? The commander-in-chief of the whole regiment militia asked. As a follower of the Wall, it is seen as despicable that someone with the power of a Titan should be used to plug up the walls. They are seen as a complete mockery of the walls that protect us, and we see fit that this young man be put to death for his crimes of mockery. The leader of the Wall religion called out angrily. Izuku stayed calm throughout the entire thing, as he wanted to make himself appear as calm as well as completely neutral to this endeavor as possible. Alright, what does the defendant have to say about his situation? Zackley asked, looking towards Izuku's expressive green eyes. Sir, as much as I would love to become a human experiment for the military police. Izuku started before spitting out human experiment with venom. I would much rather use the power I have, to reclaim the land we had lost to the Titans. I know that I cannot be trusted, not after what I showed during the reclamation of Trost district. But please know that I do not intend to destroy all of humanity with it, I only want there to be peace within the walls. And possibly help reclaim the territory lost to the Titans themselves. If I were to be placed in the Scout Regiment, I could be placed under the watchful gaze of Captain Levi, and he would ultimately decide whether or not I should live or die. He has the pure skill as well as power to kill me in my Titan form should I do anything that isn't what I would do as a Titan. Izuku said, as Zackley nodded before looking at a paper report. From what I have read on this report from some of your cadets within your year of graduation, a young woman by the name of Sasha has been seen capable of dealing with your Titan's abilities. From what these reports say, you called her out in your Titan form and allowed her to cut you out of your Titan form during the excursion of Trost. Do you have anything to say about that? Zackley asked Izuku. When I had become a Titan, I had no idea how long it had been since I could vaguely feel my arms and legs moving about Trost. It wasn't until I heard noises coming from nearby that I saw a group of cadets standing on a rooftop when I approached them. It's still not clear what happened, but from what Connie Springer and Sasha told me since I was still out of it during the time. I had called out to her in my Titan form because I was getting overheated. I wanted some fresh air and struggled trying to move some of the armor around the nape of the Titan's neck, and she cut some of the muscle fibers in the area, allowing me to pull it off, and she found me stuck inside. She pulled me out, allowing me to cool down from being inside the Titan form itself. It was really hot and humid inside of it, and I couldn't take it anymore at that exact moment. Izuku informed as Zackley nodded along. It also says here that you willingly transformed into your Titan form and moved a giant boulder that was within Trost to plug up the wall. Is this also true? Zackley asked, as Izuku gave a nod. I see. Well, I don't see why I can hold this trial any further, as I have reached a verdict. Zackley said, causing some discourse within the courtroom. Quiet, he yelled, slamming his small hammer on the pad. Under my authority of Premier Commander of the military, I sentence Midoriya Izuku to serve under Captain Levi and Commander Erwin Smith in the Scout Regiment. He is to undergo experiments to figure out how much more powers he possesses, as well as how he can utilize them in order to reclaim Wall Maria and Shiganshina district. If he shows any signs of wishing to betray humanity, then by all means ask Captain Levi to kill Midoriya Izuku before he can even leave the area he would be in currently. This court is adjourned. Time to see what Eren Yeager has to offer for his Titan powers. Zackley muttered at the end before exiting the room into the other courtroom. Izuku sat there with the metal pole still attached to his chains as he felt tears brim to the surface before placing his head on the ground. He had a feeling that he would be dead by the end of the court case, but now that he was placed under the control of the Scout Regiment, specifically Commander Erwin Smith as well as Captain Levi, he knew that he would finally be safe for a while. Whilst Commander Erwin and Captain Levi had left the room to move on to the other one, Izuku was approached by Sasha, who was in the courtroom with the scouts, as she helped him out of his cufflinks. "That was very brave of you, Izuku. I hope you will be much braver later on," Sasha said, as Izuku nodded as he felt the cufflinks break off from his hands. As soon as the two left the courthouse, they walked down the road as Izuku pulled out some regiment funds he had on him before looking at Sasha. "Want to have that dinner with me?" Izuku asked, as Sasha smiled at him. "You're buying obviously," she said, as Izuku laughed a little, pulling her in for a side hug. The girl leaned into the hug as they walked down the road, completely unaware of someone else watching them from afar on top of a roof. As the person lowered the hood on their head, it was revealed to be Annie Leonhardt as the girl stared at the boy with a slight sadness in her heart. She had become close to him over the last 3 years of training in the Cadet Corps, and she couldn't bring her heart to try and hurt the young man after he had managed to survive a court case that was hell-bent on killing him. "I can't do this for Reiner. I will wait until I can get Eren out of the scouts and bring him back to Marley, that way we could have the coordinate," she muttered before leaving. It was a few days since Izuku and Sasha had gone out on their makeshift date, if you could call it that. The young girl ate Izuku out of all his regiment funds, as she ate nothing but meat in particular, and she only wanted the expensive ones. Now that Izuku was broke, and Sasha had a full stomach, they walked over to the rooms where they all slept as she thanked Izuku for the dinner date. Blushing a bit, Izuku nodded and thanked her for allowing him to pamper her for that day after everything that had happened the entire last 48 hours. It was a few days before Izuku would be introduced to the rest of the Scout Regiment. He had heard about how the Scout Regiment had also managed to get Eren into their ranks after showing Levi beat the ever-living hell out of him before telling them all that if the young man wished to transform into a Titan, he could have done it whilst he was having his ass handed to him. They all thought the same thing and allowed the scouts to take Eren into their ranks, as well as they thought about their life choices that day. Although at this point in time, Izuku was riding a horse towards the old scout headquarters just inside the Titan territory inside Wall Maria. Izuku had been following Petra Rahl, a member of Squad Levi. She had a lot of kills and assists under her belt, whilst Izuku as a human had a measly 13 kills with at least 10 assists. He felt like he was completely unprepared for the training that Levi would place him under to increase his own skills. But what he was really unprepared for was how most of Squad Levi had gotten into cleaning wear, and Levi came up to him wearing the same garb before glaring at him. "Your first assignment in my crew, Midoriya, is to clean an entire room by yourself and make sure that there aren't any mistakes. Titans are not the only enemy we have to face out there, germs are our enemies as well. And we cannot afford to have our allies be killed by disease," Levi stated as he handed Izuku some brushes as well as some cleaning tools. Izuku ran off to a certain room that would be his and he started cleaning as much as he could, as well as fast and hard as possible. He didn't know it right then, but something awoken inside of him as he immediately began to clean the place like he was a pro. He was moving around as if he was someone who had cleaned all his life, as he moved from window to window, floor to wall, as well as pulled out weeds and tossed them out the window into a pile near the small, gated wall. Within the last few hours of the day, before the sun was starting to fall behind the mountains in the distance, Levi had entered the room and found it was completely spotless as he stared at everything. "You clean as if it was hardwired into your DNA, how are you this good for only a 16-year-old? Levi questioned as Izuku looked back at him. "I don't know. All I know was that something clicked in me when I started cleaning the room," Izuku mentioned as Levi nodded. "Well, dinner is almost done. Get down into the cafeteria so we can talk about your future training," Levi said, as Izuku nodded. A few minutes later, Izuku found himself sitting next to Levi as the man was drinking tea in the weirdest way he had ever seen someone drink tea. The man was holding the teacup by the rim of the glass and had a small portion of his hand where he placed his mouth on in order to drink. Izuku attempted to do the same as Levi but found it extremely hard to drink the tea from the way he held his hand. Not too much longer everyone got their food for the evening as they talked about the training they were preparing for Izuku and Eren. Izuku was intrigued with the training as it meant he could get better with his fighting style against Titans. He knew that most Titans were complete idiots, but there was still the true armored Titan and Colossal Titan out there who could manage to fight in their forms. Levi looked at Izuku, who was pulling out a notebook as he wrote about each of his squad members. He stayed quiet as Izuku started to mutter quietly about each member of his personal squad, and he couldn't help but let the smirk growing on his face start to show as Izuku devolved into Levi's own accomplishments. The young man had even stated that he guessed that it was because of his own bloodline that he was capable of becoming humanity's strongest fighter, having studied Eldian history for a long while. Once the dinner was complete, the entire squad of Levi's had started to have calm murmuring as a knock happened on a door behind them all. Looking towards it, a man, woman, walked through the doors with a younger male beside them as the new person walked over to the table with Eren and started talking to the boy about his power. "If you want sleep, Midoriya, you'd best be leaving. Once Hanji starts talking, they never stop until they tell you everything and have it far ingrained into your head to remember," Levi said, standing up from the table. As soon as Hanji noticed Izuku's presence, he yawned a little before telling him that he would rather get some sleep right now since he has to train in the morning. The man had nodded at his diligence to stay in shape before turning to Eren as the young man glared at Izuku's disappearing frame as Izuku walked down the hallway. As Izuku was walking towards his bedroom, he saw Erwin walking towards him with a small smile as he stood before Izuku once more. "Well, I guess I should formally introduce myself to you since I did it so informally back when you were in a holding cell back in Colossal District. My name is Erwin Smith. It is a pleasure to have our own armored titan within our ranks," Erwin said, as Izuku smiled. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to meet the devil of the Scout Regiment," Izuku said, shaking the blonde man's hand. After meeting Erwin in person, Izuku had walked around the small base of operations just outside the walls of Colossal District. He watched from the distance as animals moved about the place as they were searching for food and other things they would need for their survival. Izuku was starting to miss Sasha as he was starting to feel lonely without her presence nearby, but he shook the feeling off. He didn't wish to come off as clingy. He had memories of his past before coming to this world every other week. He was a small child, was sent to a doctor where they informed him about him being quirkless. He didn't know what the last part meant, but it did mean something. He had an old friend when he was a child, nothing more than 4 to 5 years of age, Katsuki Bakugo, and apparently the young man didn't take his quirklessness diagnosis well. The young man from his dreams started to treat him very horribly compared to those who treated him well in this world. It was with these dreams that he got during these random points in time that Izuku realized that he as a person didn't belong in this world. Of course, he would keep this information to himself. He didn't want to worry anyone with his existence. He may be a powerful fighter as well as soldier for humanity, but that doesn't mean that he has no insecurities of his own to deal with. He has to deal with his own inadequacy towards others. Some other people seem to be better at most things he does his best to excel at without even trying. Such as when training, Izuku spars with Captain Levi from time to time, but fails to land a single strike on the relatively short man. Izuku is the same height as Levi, so he can understand the feeling of feeling short compared to others within the regiment. So as the two were training together, they were sparring with one another, Levi seeming to not even be trying against Izuku, who was doing his very best in the fight to even land a single strike. Once Levi had landed a strike that would put the young man on the ground for a while, Izuku groaned on the ground as Levi complimented him on his defense. "What are you talking about? You weren't even trying," Izuku groaned out as Levi looked at him pointedly. "If I went all out against you, you would be dead from the amount of pain you'd be feeling," Levi said, as Izuku accidentally blurted out something horrible. "I've felt worse than punches to the face," Izuku said, as Levi picked the young man up and looked into his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Levi demanded as he stared into Izuku's eyes. "I used to have a friend when I was younger. He could make explosions with his hands." I don't know how I am able to remember this moment, but he would always beat me senseless with his explosive sweat. It was made with nitroglycerin and sparked with his hands to create small explosions that could become bigger with harsh training. Izuku blurted out, as Levi stared at him. Taking off the young man's shirt, he saw some burn scars in the shapes of hands all over his chest, back as well as upper left shoulder. The most prominent one was the hand imprint on the left shoulder of Izuku's body as Levi stared at it closely. You were bullied growing up. How? Levi questioned as Izuku sighed and sat down. You might want to sit down. This might sound impossible for you to hear, Izuku said, as Levi sat down next to Izuku as they looked at the nature surrounding them. Izuku then went on about all the weird memories he was having in the disguise of dreams to Levi, talking about a world where superpowers were real and that heroes were a job anyone could get so long as they could have a superpower of their own. Izuku then told the man about how he was diagnosed as quirkless, quirks being the superpowers he was referring to. Once Levi got the gist of what had happened, he understood how Izuku got the burns on his body that were forever scarred on his body. So this Kachan person had taken your information of being quirkless harshly and decided to make your life horrible from that day forward. Levi assumed as Izuku nodded his head. I don't even know what I did in a past life in that world to make me be forced to be bullied wrongfully, Izuku said, as he held his head. As soon as Levi and Izuku had returned from their training, they soon found Eren talking to his old friends from the 104th Cadet Corps who had arrived. Izuku saw Sasha as the girl was seemingly searching for someone, and as he walked up behind her, he poked her shoulder from behind, causing the girl to turn around to see him standing there with Captain Levi. Izuku, she called out, as the girl pulled Izuku into a hug. Izuku, who was being squeezed tightly in her embrace, slowly pulled his arms around her body as he melted into the hug. It was something he was wishing for over the last few weeks since being in the scout regiment without her as well as their friends. As the others noticed Izuku's presence, they all ran over and pulled the young man, with Sasha by the way, into a large embrace that allowed him to melt even further into it. He was starting to become more antsy lately since he was not receiving a lot of social interaction with those who were around his age. The group had all then looked at one another as they all stated that they would celebrate that the group was back together after all the trials and tribulations. Izuku had noticed that Reiner and Bertolt were looking at him warily since he was a Titan shifter similar to Eren. Izuku knew that he wasn't the armored Titan that had taken down Wall Maria, but he still had nightmares that everything he was living through at the moment was not something he could understand and was just that. A dream. The group of cadets had gotten their capes and wore them around the base as they all would get rest before their training as scouts would begin the next morning. Erwin was standing near his window in the office he had as he looked back at his desk holding the next formation he would use for the mission for the scouts. I surely hope that the new cadets within the scouts will survive this excursion into the outer walls. Our mission is to see if there are any other Titan shifters within our walls, who bear the mission to cause havoc as well as mayhem. I surely hope that if we were to meet a female Titan, she could give us all the information about where Titans come from, Erwin said, as he stared at the formation in order to find the best place to put Levi's squad. The night continued on as Izuku was seen walking around the base in nothing but his cape and some undergarments as he took in the nighttime air. Breathing into his hands, he watched as the sun went down over the horizon as he took in the light that the moon gave him. Everything was just as beautiful as it was in the morning light, but it just seemed to become that much better since it was not as clear as morning. He let out a sigh as he thought about the next upcoming expedition outside the walls that were sure to come about. He never noticed how Levi was walking around the area and found him standing outside all alone without anyone being nearby to see him. Levi walked over to Izuku and stood next to him. Izuku felt a familiar presence next to him but didn't let it show on his face. What are you doing out here, Midoriya? Aren't you supposed to be in bed? Levi questioned as Izuku continued to look at the horizon. Just stargazing, sir. I wanted to be out here for when the stars would soon come out. I've always loved looking at the stars with my mother when I was little. They were small little things in the sky. But when looking closely at them on a microscope in the world that I lived in before appearing here, they were just so big. We are nothing but insignificant beings living in a wider universe. That not even we could explore the stars at this time. my world was on the cusp of exploring the stars before quirks became a constant on Earth. When quirks first appeared on my version of Earth, everyone stopped what they were doing in order to explore just what quirks could do. Once that happened, they just created a new job where people of Earth could just be heroes as a job. I guess what I'm saying is that if this is a time before that happened, I really hope that we make a ship that could explore the stars. Instead of being a hero, learning about the universe is something that I wish I could do. Izuku said, before pulling his cape closer to himself as he walked away from his captain. As Levi stood there looking to the stars, he thought about Izuku's new dream of exploring the stars of space and looking to the sky for the next adventure of his own. Smiling to himself, he thought about a future where he could become an astronaut like Izuku talked about, but stopped himself since this was reality, not a dream. He would walk back towards the scout base unaware that Erwin had been nearby hearing the small conversation between the two short stacks. So he came from another world to our own. I will need to make sure that things are better here than there. We still need him here to help us explore the Earth. I certainly hope that he isn't given a chance to return back to his world sooner rather than later. Erwin said, as he thought about the mission of the scouts. It has been a few months since Izuku had last met with Erwin as the young man was seated on his horse within the edge of Colonath district. He was sitting on the horse that was designated to himself, who was aptly named Casa, named after the Casablanca lily, that was found on swamps within the walls. Izuku though called the horse Lily since it was a short abbreviation of her full name. She was the same colors as the plants for her hide. She was white on the upper portions of her body with the brown resembling the dirt of the ground it was laid within. There was some splotches of green paint that Izuku had placed in the past in order to really sell the fact that she was named after the plant. Some over the horse's shoulder as well as lower legs, as they looked more like stems of a flower of a lily. But beside that, Izuku was looking around at the other scout regiment men who were surrounding him and Squad Levi as they looked around themselves as well. Izuku took notice that Eren was staring at a group of kids looking at them with shock-filled happiness that reminded Izuku about the stories he'd heard from Mikasa about how Eren looked at the scouts as if they were gods amongst men. To the young man's dismay. But as Izuku stared at the two children, he found himself looking at them with fondness in his eyes, and as he was looking at the two, a small but quick memory replaced the two of the kids with himself and a faceless boy with explosive ash blonde hair. Come on, Deku. We need to make sure that we see All Might. He's getting interviewed in the city. The ash blonde called out, as Izuku's much smaller form ran after him. Wait up, Kachan. The younger version of himself said, as the smaller boy had run after the slightly taller boy. Izuku sat there staring off into the distance when he was brought back into the mission as one of the leading members of the scouts yelled out. All right everyone, we are here to reclaim the wall that was lost to us all. Make sure that you are ready. We are taking off in 2 minutes. The man said, as Izuku prepared himself mentally for heading outside the walls. As soon as the time limit was surpassed, Erwin had pulled his arm into the air as he showed his singular blade within the ODM gear's gripper. All forces, advance, Erwin called out, as everyone had left the safety of Colonath district and out into the outer portions of Wall Rose as a whole. Comma 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 comma. Izuku rode within Squad Levi's group as he kept an eye out for Titans that were closing in on their location within the formation. And sure enough, a Titan had broken its way into the formation at the start and was making its way to the entire formation as a whole. Alright guys, make sure that you stay on course and don't stop. Levi said, as they all sped up. With them increasing their speed in order to leave the safety of the buildings near the wall, the Titan was accosted by some of the scouts who had entered battle with it. Not much longer, the group had soon arrived at the outer rim with Michi standing at the edge of the small edge of the town. Alright, Squad Levi, you know the drill. Get to where Erwin wishes for you all to be located. Michi said, as he looked over the small town as well as other cadets leaving the town. With everyone that was accounted for out of there, Izuku stayed near Levi as they made their way through the landscape that was bound to be filled with Titans large and small. He was also beginning to feel worried about Sasha as the young woman was close to him as it already was. He was also thinking of her as his girlfriend as of late. He knows that the date they had sealed that portion of his fate. But he couldn't help but worry about the girl he likes being killed by a Titan, and he wouldn't know about it until the expedition had ended. He and Levi's squad had been riding for a few hours at this point, and they were nearing a massive forest from what it seemed to look like in the distance. Izuku had not been happy with the fact that they'd have to move through the forest since it was the perfect place for ODM gear to be used. But at the same time, Titans can use the trees for cover as well. All in all, the forest of giant trees was the perfect playground for both humans and Titans as a whole. But for some reason Izuku felt the hairs on the back of his neck were becoming raised, and as he looked around the area for what was causing him to feel this way, Levi had taken notice. "So, it seems she's shown herself," the man muttered, just loud enough for his entire squad to overhear him. "What do you mean, she's shown herself, Captain?" Petra asked. "It means exactly what I believe it means. The female Titan has finally shown itself. And we are going to head over to that forest to draw her out," Levi said, as he increased the speed his horse was running at. Everyone followed his lead, although Izuku strayed near the back of the group as he kept looking around the area. It got to the point where the rest of the squad had noticed Izuku's very defensive expression he was showing. Not to mention that all the hair on his body seemed to be standing on end. "Midoriya-kun, what is going on? Why are you looking tenser than usual?" Eld asked, looking concerned. "We're not alone out here. I don't know how I can tell, but I can just tell. No, feel as if we're not alone out here," Izuku said, as the man got the message. Everyone then noticed a mass of black smoke to their right, and Eren had become distraught with what that entailed. But just as he was about to cry out in agony from the fact that the entire right flank had been taken out, someone showed up with some blood on their coat wearing a scared visage. Riding up to them, they were confused as to why they were there, but shook their head to give off a message. "Lieutenant Treyer reporting. The entire right flank of the formation has been compromised. Titans had appeared out of nowhere and completely annihilated it," the commander called out, as Levi nodded. "Petra, send that message to Erwin." Everyone else moved back to their previous stations. Levi demanded as they all listened. As soon as the lieutenant had left the area, the group had squeezed closer together as they rode as fast as they could towards the forest of giant trees. On the other side of the formation a few minutes earlier, we find Armin riding his horse without much in the way of himself. It was actually calming for himself as he rode through the vast countryside without a care in the world whilst staying on guard. Not too far behind him, two commanding officers within the scouts were talking to one another before taking notice of a Titan that was making their way closer to them. But there was definitely something off about it. It was completely feminine in nature as well as had short blonde hair and blue eyes. But the more confusing part about it was that it was running towards them with a speed that rivaled their horses. But as soon as they could react to it, the Titan had somehow managed to catch up to them, causing them to move away from the Titan but stay close to it. Noticing that it was moving in the direction of Armin, they nodded towards one another before preparing to attack the Titan themselves. Unaware of their audience watching them in horror, the two teamed up in order to skillfully take it down, and as they closed in on the Titan's nape, the white bandana-wearing man sliced his swords onto the nape. But something happened that brought his mind to a screeching halt. His blades broke on contact with the nape, and he watched as there was a blue crystalline formation over the nape. Before he could analyze the situation completely, his wire was grabbed by the Titan as the Titan had flung him towards the ground, with his ally being killed mercilessly in the same way. Armin, who had been watching from afar without having to be in their way, had looked on in terror. Turning his horse around to run as fast as possible away from the Titan itself, he started to run through everything in his mind about that battle. There's no way that Titan is an abnormal. They wouldn't protect their nape like that. If anything, that Titan is like Eren, like Izuku. It's intelligent. Armin came to the conclusion as he heard the sounds of footsteps above him. Craning his head upwards, Armin would never admit this aloud. But he would no longer need to use the bathroom as he saw the Titan staring at him with a mirth in its eyes before slamming the foot down in front of his horse, sending him flying off of it. As he tumbled on the ground rolling around, he had accidentally pulled the hood over his face as he laid on the ground trying to gain his bearings. He froze in place when he felt the ground tremble around himself as he felt the presence of the Titan above him. As soon as he looked to his left, he found the head of the Titan staring at him from the side with a sideways glance, and he felt his hood coming off of his head revealing his dark golden locks of hair. Once it was shown that he was not what the Titan was seemingly looking for, it stood back up and prepared to leave. And as soon as it started to run in the direction he was originally riding towards, Armin sat there with the most confused look on his face. It looked at my face. Why? Armin questioned aloud. Not much longer Armin was found by Reiner and Jean as they had noticed him without his horse. Armin, you shouldn't be on the ground without your horse. Come on, we need to see what that Titan's doing, Reiner said, as Armin nodded wordlessly. Climbing on top of the secondary horse, he and Reiner had ridden with Jean as they were following the Titan. So anything we should know about this Titan, other than the fact that she looks absolutely sexy? Reiner questioned, specifically glaring at its ass. All I know is that there is a human inside of that Titan. We need to make sure that it doesn't find who it's looking for. From what I experienced from it, it is looking for someone. But the most standout thing about it has intelligence like Eren and Izuku's Titan forms. Armin said, as Reiner grunted in exasperation. Jean had been quiet the entire time as he growled in silence. It wasn't much longer before they all decided to come up with a plan to buy time for who it was looking for. Armin had surmised that it's looking for either Izuku or Eren since the other two were the only ones who had been able to transform into Titans thus far. And as soon as the group of three had fought the Titan, they were doing their job of holding it off for as long as they could. Armin had been launched off his horse once again, like seriously, is that all that's going to happen to him today? Jean had gone in for an attack as he tried to find a spot to attack the nape, but the female Titan had blocked his way of attacking. And he was endlessly going to swing around until he ran out of gas or was killed by the Titan, and as the Titan prepared to kill Jean, Armin had screamed out at him. Avenge the fool Jean, Armin had screamed out, glaring at both Jean and the female Titan. What? Jean questioned as he stared in shock. Get revenge for her killing Eren. He was in the right flank of the formation. All the Titans brought in from the flank on the right completely annihilated the right flank of the formation. Armin called out, remembering his conversation. If she is searching for Eren, where would he be? I had him in the right flank for my map. Reiner called out, as Armin thought about it. What are you talking about? Mine had Eren and Squad Levi within the left flank. Jean stated back, entering the conversation as they planned on how to take down the Titan. Wait, what if he's not in those exact spots? What if he's in the safest spot within the formation? Armin questioned as both young men looked at him. What are you talking about? Jean asked, as Reiner was quiet. Think about it, where is the safest position within the formation we were all given? Armin asked, as Jean realized it as well. The center rear of the formation. They would be safe there since they are surrounded by all forms of scouts on every single side. Jean exclaimed. With that information known between the three of them, they initiated their attack. When the Titan froze in its tracks, she had a lost look in her eyes as she waited to do something about her mission. As Jean was able to finally let go of the female Titan's nape, he flew down and landed near a tree where he could get that near-death experience out of his mind for the moment as he stared at the Titan in question in fear. Not much longer after he did that though, Reiner had run up past Armin as he attacked the female Titan as he flew towards her nape for the easy kill. But as soon as he came close to her shoulder, the Titan had moved her head to look at him with a sadistic smile on her face as Reiner had looked at her in slight fear but determined to finish his goal. He was caught in the air as he stared at the Titan as it started to increase her grip on his body, seemingly deciding that squishing him between her hand was the correct option. As soon as Reiner felt his entire body feeling as if his own internal organs were going to be blown out of his body, he managed to pull up a blade and slice into the hand. But for Armin and Jean, it seemed that the female Titan had squished him in her hold, and it looked that way for a few more moments. Staring in shock as well as utter sadness about their friend's supposed death at the hand of the female Titan, something happened to bring their faith back. Reiner had sliced through the fingers of the female titan and spun around in the air, breaking his blades in the process. Graha! He cried out, titan blood all over his face as well as hair. Landing near Armin, he grabbed the young man and headed over towards Jean in order to get as far away from the female titan as possible. As he ran away with Armin, the young man looked over the shoulder of Reiner as he watched the female titan look at her hand. Then stand back up and look in the direction of the center rear of the formation. At least roughly where it was located. Wait, that's in the general direction of the center rear of the formation. How does she even know to look in that direction? Armin questioned in his mind before looking back at Reiner. Reiner, we need to stop her. She's going in the direction where the center rear of the formation is located. Armin called out, as Reiner gave a point of his own. How are we supposed to catch up to her as we are now? We lost our horses. We're stuck out here without any form of transportation. Reiner said, as Armin quickly shut up. Comma 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 comma. Izuku looked off in the direction of where he felt the danger coming towards them. Its speed farther increased. He increased the speed of his own horse as he thought about why he was feeling a sort of danger being increased the closer they got to the forest of giant trees. Anything you wish to share, Midoriya? Levi questioned as he looked back at Izuku. I'm getting a weird sense of danger the closer we get to the forest, sir, that's all. Izuku said, as they reached the outer portion of the forest. Not far from where they were located, a certain female titan looked over in Izuku's direction, and she smirked to herself as she saw her prize staring in her general direction from the tree line. 6. Izuku and the rest of Levi's squad were riding their horses through the massive valley leading up to the forest of giant trees. The young man had been feeling like he was going to be sick for the last 15 minutes as the bad feeling in his gut worsened over time. By the time they had found the forest, they all entered it as they made sure that the rest of the groups besides the support crew stayed out of the place. They continued to ride as Izuku's hairs started to lift from their relaxed state and he knew that whoever was coming for them were already inside the forest by now. They continued to ride their horses as their faces became more and more pale from the nervous aura surrounding them whilst Levi himself remained quiet but neutral. They all made it around at least halfway to the halfway point to their destination within the forest when they heard the sounds of ODM gear behind them. Eren had spared a glance behind them all and watched a few of the scouts fly out from behind some trees as they watched the trees. Izuku glanced behind himself as well to see Eren not paying attention to the road ahead of himself as Izuku reached over and pulled the horse along. Come on Eren, we need to get going, Izuku said, as Eren nodded. But what about the others? He asked, worriedly. Eren, you are the last person I would be expecting to worry about people who you have no idea are their names. Izuku said, as they continued riding along. As they rode along, the air around them all became very eerie, and Izuku was becoming more and more antsy as time moved on. They were nearing their destination and just as he thought that it was his nerves were just getting him paranoid. The female titan revealed herself and started to chase after them. Shit, Izuku cursed aloud as he increased the speed of his horse. Eren and the others did the same as they rode as fast as possible with Levi staying in front of the group. Ah, one of the scouts flying about screamed before being turned into a blood splatter on a tree. Another one flew in and sliced around her nape, breaking their blades in the process as she grabbed the man and slammed him into the ground. One of the last scouts who were trying their best to distract her threw their anchor at her as she dodged immediately and grabbed the hook, pulling them in and slamming them into the tree before picking up her pace. Shit, 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 Izuku muttered as the female titan increased her pace to where she could almost catch them. Keep moving, we're almost there, Levi called out, as Eren began to try and bite his hand. Comma 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 comma. On the outside of the forest, the rest of the scouts who weren't allowed inside the forest thought about everything that happened that day. The female titan that some of them came across had left them in search of a better prize, but at the same time bringing hundreds of titans from seemingly nowhere. They had survived this expedition to this point but were very wary of their surroundings as they kept an eye on some of the titans coming up close to the forest. Their only mission: keep them all out of the forest whilst the main force prepares for something within the forest itself. Armin and Jean had stood next to one another as they kept an eye out for any titans coming close and killing any who tried to enter the forest. What do you think their plan is, Armin? Why aren't we allowed to kill any titans that don't enter the forest? Jean asked, as Armin looked down. At least 15 titans alone were staring at him with smiles on their faces as they attempted to climb the trees to reach them. Some others attempted to jump to them but failed when they accidentally landed on the nape of their own necks, killing themselves. I don't know, Jean, but I believe it has something to do with the female titan we came across. Armin said, as he watched the titans below. We need to get to another branch that's higher, that one's in jumping distance. Jean stated as both young men jumped to a higher branch. The titan who was climbing then slipped on one of the branches and fell down to the ground, kicking up a lot of dust. Aren't we supposed to kill any titans that enter the forest? Then why aren't we being told to kill any yet? Armin asked, as Jean looked at him in confusion. What are you talking about? Jean questioned as Armin pointed at their squad leader. He's told us about 14 minutes ago now that any titans that enter the forest, we are to kill them immediately. But he hasn't moved from his position yet, and he's sweating profusely. It means he has no idea what we're protecting inside the forest. Armin said, as Jean nodded. Well, if I was Commander Erwin, what would I want to protect in the middle of this forest? Jean muttered to himself before Armin stared at him with a recognition that he never shown before. He is trying to capture the female titan. He is wanting to keep her safe from any and all harm so that we can come back not empty-handed, but with one of the traitors. Armin said, as Jean nodded. That does make sense. It would give us a reason to keep the titans here. But that leaves one issue. What does he want with the female titan? Jean asked, as Armin sat there and thought about Erwin's reasons. Mikasa and Sasha had taken down another 2 titans who had made their way into the forest and were now resupplying. How many do you have, Sasha? Mikasa asked, as the country girl sighed. I think I killed at least 8 of them. What about you? She asked, as the 2 girls replaced their gear. About 16 of them. There is so many though. What is Commander Erwin doing in there that's so secretive? She asked, as Sasha thought about it. I don't know, but whatever it is, he doesn't want any titans to enter the forest. She said, as Mikasa stayed there thinking. Comma 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 comma. Deep in the forest, Levi and his squad were trying to dissuade Eren from initiating a battle between both him and the female titan. Eren, I know that you want to fight her, but that doesn't mean you can control your titan form right now. Levi said, in a light scolding manner. So you expect me to just let our allies just die to her? I can't live with myself if we allow this to happen. Eren said, as Petra moved up. Don't you trust us, Eren? Question mark. We gave you our own trust on the day we trained to see what your form was. So why don't you give us the trust we need? Petra called out, as one of the squad stated that another scout had died. Izuku stayed quiet as he remembered the day that they had given the young man their trust, and he had wanted to state that they didn't give him their trust until they bit their own hands but kept quiet. As much as Eren had spouted about becoming a scout, the young man hadn't really given them the trust an avid fan of them had required to give. The whole back and forth came and went as Eren eventually decided against to use his power to fight the female titan. And as they continued to ride their horses, they found a small clearing as they rushed past as the female titan felt everything start to move in slow motion as she stared at her surroundings. Massive barrels with whatever was inside were pointed directly at her as on one of the trees, Erwin Smith had pulled out a blade from his ODM gear and shouted only one word. Fire! Once that word was yelled, a massive sound of guns firing from all angles had been heard throughout the forest. Even those who were guarding the edge of it from the titans had faltered slightly where they stood when they heard the sounds of gunfire. Levi and his squad continued riding for a little bit before the captain had left the group under the care of Eld as he took off to meet up with Erwin. "Keep those two safes for now. I need to speak with Erwin," Levi stated, jumping off his horse and using his ODM gear to get to the commander. "See that, Eren? We have the technology in order to capture Titans. She had stood no chance against us," Oluo called out, with a hysterical smile on his face. "This is what happens when you trust us, Eren," Petra said, a smirk on her own face. "I will never not trust you all again," Eren said, as he laughed. Izuku stayed quiet though. His gut feeling had subsided for the moment, but that could all change within a very noticeable moment. He kept his guard up, that way he could not be taken advantage of. They rode through the forest to a massive clearing, but with a lot of trees for cover from Titans who were already in the forest this deep. The group had resupplied when a caravan passed by with their replacement gear, and once they were ready, Izuku sat down to eat some lunch. "Wow, that was a rush. I would rather not do that again," Eren said, as he sat down near Petra. "Don't worry, little guy, you get used to it after a long time has passed," Petra said, giggling. "Hey, don't say that, Petra. I still remember what happened when you and Oluo had your first mission beyond the walls," Eld said, chuckling as both the girl and Oluo himself became massively defensive. "It was one time. Do not start talking about me, Eld." The two called out and started to bicker with one another. Izuku watched on as Levi's squad had bickered like siblings, and he couldn't help but smile at their antics. It then revealed something that he really wished he had in the world he originally came from. He really wanted his mother right about now, as much as he really loved spending time with Sasha as well as his friends within this world. It was much more dangerous than his original world. He wasn't even safe within this world because of the Titan's constant presence within it. Not to mention he had heard of how educationally smart teachers apparently disappeared when they started asking questions about the world outside the walls. So nobody was safe within this world from either the last bits of humanity or the outside walls, but he wouldn't trade his friends he'd made on the way for anything. As the small group were preparing to head back to where the main military were located, they heard a scream coming from where they came from, and it didn't sound like it was friendly. Play the video up above. With Levi, the man had been standing on top of the female Titan as he watched as his allies attempted to figure out what they needed to do. They wanted to make sure that they could bring her in to do some experiments to see what they could do to bring out whoever was inside. He jumped from the tree he was standing on as he attempted to make sure that he could get her to come out. "Is it okay if we cut off your hands and legs? They'll grow back, right? I'm talking about your limbs, not the Titans," Levi stated as small questions before continuing to stare at her. He moved his blades slightly as he made his next words very clear to her. "We need you alive, after all." Levi paused for dramatic effect when the Titan had opened her mouth slightly. He watched her very closely as he kept his guard up, and not too long later, she started to scream out to the forest, causing everyone to hear from a 100-mile radius. Scouts from all around the forest heard the scream as they all waited in bated breath for whatever she called out for to arrive. And as soon as everything went silent, Levi stomped his foot on her head as he tried to figure out what in the world she just screamed for. "What was that for? You trying to make us deaf?" he mocked as he stomped his foot. Just out of his hearing range, a scout going by the name Mike had landed near Erwin as he told him something, and that was when Levi heard it. Small sounds of feet slamming the ground coming from in front of himself as he looking upwards. And not too far away were Titans running towards them all. Preparing himself for a battle, he threw himself towards them, killing two but missing the third since it was smaller than the rest of them, and from where Erwin was watching from, he became very alarmed. "They're eating her," he thought as more Titans appeared from the forest. He screamed out to the men and women within his ranks with an order they couldn't disobey. "Protect the female Titan. We cannot allow her to die," Erwin called out, as every scout flew towards the incoming projectiles that were Titans. Back with Izuku and the others, they had heard the sound of the female Titan screaming from the forest as they became antsy. Some of the Titans nearby had run into the forest towards where they had last seen Levi and the rest of the scouts. "We need to get out of here. If the female Titan can scream like that, who's to say that she can't call more to kill all of us?" Izuku said, jumping down to his horse. I'm with the young guy on this eld, we need to leave, now. Oluo said, as the group followed Izuku. Eld didn't want to say anything because he was getting the same feeling Izuku had. This battle wasn't over yet, in fact, he believes that it was just beginning. Back with the Titans eating the corpse of the female Titan, every scout who had entered battle, jumped back as Erwin called a ceasefire. To think that the female Titan would call for reinforcements to kill herself, I didn't think that they'd be that gung-ho about not giving us the information we need. Hange said, as they all dropped to their own horses. I didn't see the Titan itself get eaten. Erwin said, as Hange looked confused. What do you mean, Erwin? She asked, as Erwin mentioned his words again. The Titan itself called for the smaller and much more predictable ones to come and eat her. But I don't recall ever seeing the human inside getting torn apart. Erwin said, as they all rode towards the exit of the forest. Wait, do you mean? She asked, as Erwin nodded. I have reason to believe that if this Titan shifter can allow themselves to be eaten, then there is a chance that they will have the stamina to transform again. Erwin said, as they all rode away. Erwin had used that time to allow Levi to resupply his blades and gas in order to get back to his squad who were deep in the forest nearby. Back with Izuku and their allies, their horses suddenly got spooked, throwing them off of their backs and fleeing the area. Well, looks like we're using our gear to get out of here, Gunther said, as they all took to the trees. Not much longer after they started to make their way through the forest, they saw a green signal flare which appeared not much longer than the purple one for retreat. Gunther, thinking that it was Levi, sent out his own green signal flare and they moved towards where the flare had been shown. I don't like this eld, Izuku said, as they followed after him. What do you mean? He asked, as Izuku stared at him. I've got a bad feeling about this, Izuku muttered, as not too long after he said this Gunther made a voice of acknowledgement. Wait, you're not, Gunther said, before being cut off by a figure flying past him and his body falling downward. Slice, Gunther, Eren called out, as he flew over to the body of the man. Staring at the dead corpse of Gunther, Izuku flew into the young man as he tossed him forward. Keep moving, Eren, we need to leave now, Izuku called out, as the two continued through the forest with the remnants of Squad Levi trailing behind. You guys deal with whoever was behind us. I'll take Eren ahead of us, Izuku called out, as the group nodded. Grabbing Eren and pulling them both forwards, Izuku blasted off as a large lightning bolt had appeared in the forest. Out of the lightning bolt and steam from the area where the lightning came from, the female Titan reappeared again and took off towards Squad Levi's remnants. Who all prepared for a fight against the giant of a woman. Izuku took off with Eren as the two made their way away from the female Titan as fast as they could possibly go. Izuku knew that the female Titan was definitely intelligent considering the fact that she continued to chase after both him and Eren. So increasing his speed to get through the forest with Eren, he made sure that Eren kept up with him without looking back at Squad Levi. Come on, Eren, we need to get to Commander Erwin. He will know what to do, Izuku said, as Eren nodded and flew next to him. With the two out of view, the female Titan focused her time on the remnants of Levi's squad as she attacked them with unrelenting power as well as speed. They moved past her defenses as well as took her vision as they started to take her down by attacking her musculature in order to prevent her from covering her nape. They moved faster than the eye could perceive as they sliced through the skin and muscle of the female Titan. And as they continued to do this, we move back to Izuku and Eren as they traversed the entire forest in a bid to get to Erwin. They were flying and Izuku couldn't help but think of the worst-case scenario of whether or not Squad Levi could take the female Titan down on their own. If they were taken down, all that would remain of Squad Levi would be him and Eren, and Izuku promised himself that he would keep Eren safe from the female at all costs. They were nearing a large clearing so they could gather some supplies from some dead scouts when they heard a blood-curdling scream from behind themselves. Eren looked like he wanted to go back to see what happened, but Izuku shook his head and told Eren to head out. With that said and done, the two took off after resupplying off the dead bodies of their comrades who had died in battle with the female Titan. They flew as fast as they could, and Izuku could hear the sounds of feet stomping in the distance, something that Eren couldn't. Letting out a sigh of sadness, he knew that if they were what he believed they were. Squad Levi couldn't take her down. Looking to Eren, who was paying attention to the area around himself, Izuku smiled at him before speaking. Eren, move forward, and whatever you do, don't look back, Izuku said, as he turned himself around and held his ground in the air. What are you doing? Eren called out, as Izuku gave him a stiff salute. See you on the other side, Eren, Izuku said, as he grabbed the young man and threw him as far as he could away from the area. Comma 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 comma. A few minutes before Izuku prepared a final stand against the female Titan, Squad Levi were seen attacking the female Titan. They were speeding around the place faster and faster as they took large portions of the female Titan's musculature off. And soon enough they managed to take her arms away from her nape as Eld prepared to move in to slice it off. Once he jumped from where he was located, he flew towards the nape preparing to kill the female Titan once and for all. I will make sure that you don't come back again. You cannot be captured, Eld thought before he moved in as fast as he could towards the nape. Deeeeee, Eld called out, as he swung his blades towards the nape of the female Titan. But as soon as he spoke, the female Titan moved her body and bit Eld and stopped his momentum. As soon as the female Titan had stood back up to full height, both Petra and Oluo were staring on in shock. What? How was she able to see him? There's no way that she could have caught him, Oluo thought in frozen fear. The female then spat out the two pieces of Eld as the man fell to the ground dead. Petra had then moved towards the ground as the female Titan moved onto her next. The girl was flying way too close to the ground as she was looking at the female Titan as she had started to recover her lost musculature. How is this possible? She couldn't have healed up herself in enough time to do that. Petra ranted in fear. It was here that she finally saw the singular eye of the female Titan as the other one was now recovering with steam coming from the wound. She healed only one eye. How is that possible? It shouldn't be possible for a Titan to heal just one eye before a minute passed. It hadn't even been a full minute. Wait, did she focus all her healing on one singular eye? Question mark single quote. Petra thought as she panicked. Petra, watch out. Petra, move out of the way, Oluo called out, as Petra noticed how close the female Titan was too late. And as soon as the woman noticed how close the female Titan was, it was already too late as she slammed her foot crushing the woman into a nearby tree. Ah! Petra screamed before it was cut off. Oluo had sat there in the air as he let out his tears at the death of his comrade, and he flew in with fury on his mind as he managed to slice the nape. He called out, as he felt himself slice something on the female Titan's nape. What the? I could have sworn, Oluo questioned in a whisper before a massive leg smashed into his back tearing him to pieces. Once that was done, the female Titan stood amongst the destruction of the forest as she twirled her hair and moved forwards. She knew the general location of where Izuku and Eren had gone, and she would make it there before they could escape the forest. The Squad Levi had only slowed her down, and as she stomped her way over to where she thought Izuku and Eren were located, she found Izuku floating above a massive clearing. She stared at him as he did the same. She stopped in the middle of the clearing as she saw Izuku lower himself to be near her face. So this is what you look like up close. I never thought that the female Titan would look so similar to someone I would know. Especially since your hair and eye color are so similar, Izuku said, as he moved away as she reached for him. I will not allow you to collect Eren, and the same will not happen to me. I don't know what you want with me and Eren, but I will make sure that you will not leave this forest. At least not without being taken hostage, Izuku said, as he bit his own hand, shocking the female Titan greatly as a massive lightning bolt had blasted into the body of Izuku as the ground cratered from the shockwave. As soon as a massive storm of heat as well as steam covered the female Titan's view of her target, she didn't have to wait too soon as she saw a truly massive Titan forming in front of herself. He stood at a massive 17 meters tall as he had armor surrounding his entire form, not to mention the massive warhammer that was held in his arms. The Titan took a couple steps forwards before Izuku roared into the high heavens as steam blasted off of him as the female Titan moved backwards from the shockwave of steam. She then took a few more steps back as the warhammer had swung towards her as she barely dodged it from taking her head. She knew that from the armored Titan's body as well as how much power needed from it that she needed to wait this out. She had the endurance in order to outlast the new Titan form that Izuku showed her, and she would not have to wait long as Izuku went for another attack. The ground thumped as both Titans moved about the place in search of defeating the other, roaring at one another as they attempted to take the other down. All the thumping and roaring had caused two people who were searching for the people they had been in search of had soon arrived. And they saw a massive armored Titan with a warhammer attacking the female Titan as she struggled to dodge strike after strike. "Which one is Izuku, Ackerman?" Levi questioned as Mikasa pointed at the armored individual Titan. "All right, the plan right now is to make the female Titan use enough power that she can't block a hit from him. It looks as though Izuku can handle his own at the moment, but we can't allow him to lose. Take this seriously," Levi said, as they both headed to the armored warhammer Titan. As soon as Izuku managed to land a powerful right hook onto the female Titan, that was when Levi and Mikasa had landed on his shoulder. "Izuku, where is Eren?" Mikasa called out, as Izuku pointed in the general direction the young man went. Mikasa didn't need to wait to be told twice as she took off in search of Eren, and with Levi standing next to Izuku's massive head the man looked into the emerald eye staring at him. "All right Izuku, what we need you to do is make sure that you damage her enough to stop her from coming after us. Do you understand?" Levi questioned as Izuku nodded. And with that the two split apart and moved towards the female with renewed strength. Izuku went with a forward right hook that the female dodged, and with that dodge she moved into position for Levi to slice away her eyes causing her to place a hand over her nape. And as Izuku moved forwards he landed a few hits on her vulnerable form as he moved about the area, and grabbed his warhammer and swung it in the air. She ducked underneath the attack as she suddenly felt one of her Achilles heels lose their tendons keeping her from standing upright. That was when another strike had just grazed her head as a few strands of titanic hair had slipped off her head as a massive explosion of dirt and debris flew into the air, hiding Levi within as he flew down and sliced up her arms as well as face once more as she struggled to move away. The two pushed the female Titan into a corner as Izuku managed to pull her arm away and bit into the nape and pulling back. As soon as the person inside was revealed to be Annie Leonhardt, Izuku froze for a second before pulling her out of the Titan body. As soon as she tried to cover herself in Titan crystal, Izuku crushed it as soon as it appeared, causing the girl to look at both Levi and Izuku's Titan form with both concern as well as exhaustion. As her vision was slowly disappearing from view, she found her eyes locking onto Emerald as Izuku stared at her in his human form standing outside of his Titan. 2. With the defeat of the female Titan, Izuku and Levi had gagged her as well as took her items she could use to transform as they had sliced off her arms and legs, preventing her from having the energy to fight again. They took off as they held her on Izuku's back and within the next hour they had managed to complete their mission. They had managed to capture the female Titan and would manage to get answers from her once the interrogation began back in the Scout Regiment headquarters. Izuku flew next to Levi as the man was just quiet, and Izuku let out a sad sigh as he looked at the captain. "Sorry for the deaths of your squad. I thought that they could last a bit longer than the female Titan," Izuku said, as Levi glanced at him. "Don't worry about it, we managed to catch the female Titan. So all in all, we have managed to successfully complete the mission we were sent out on outside the walls," Levi said, as Izuku nodded. Arriving at the main force of the scouts, everyone was surprised when they found Annie Leonhardt being carried on Izuku's back. "What is Annie doing out here?" Armin asked, concerned. "She's the female Titan, it was really obvious now that I think about it," Izuku said, as he pointed out the similar hair color as well as the eyes and fighting style. "We should get back to base, we can't allow our prisoner to get away if she heals fast enough," Levi said, as everyone had left. "Soldiers, mission success. We have caught the female Titan. Return to base immediately," Erwin called out, as everyone let out a hurrah and left for Kolonath district. It had been a few stressful nights for the Scout Regiment after they had returned to Kolonath without any kind of win. The people of the district had questioned why they had continued to pay for the group to continuously head outside the walls in order to reclaim land that was lost when all they did was bring back failure after failure. And it wasn't literally moments after they had returned from their journey with less people than before, but it was a week after they had returned that they got the letter to bring both Izuku and Eren to them for dissecting as well as other experiments. Because of the fact that they had captured Annie Leonhardt, they didn't have to create some outrageous plan in order to capture her whilst also showing the people of Stohess district the problems of intelligent titans not on their side. This time, they had to make a plan to get both Izuku and Eren as far away from the government as possible without alerting the higher-ups about their movements. And it was perfectly timed with the fact that Eren and Izuku were with the rest of the cadets just in a scout base on the outer walls within wall rows. So as the scouts had walked through their base within the walls, their leader of Erwin Smith and Levi Ackerman had walked down the halls to the dungeons of the castle. Once they arrived within the room where Annie was lying in wait for them to arrive, they conversed about how they will go about their interrogation against the young woman. Considering that she was around the age of Izuku and Eren, they believed that they could bring her to their side in order to protect the populace of the walls. And with that plan in motion, the two soon arrived at the dungeon holding Annie Leonhardt, as the young woman sat on a bench with her arms, legs and mouth completely guarded. As soon as their presence was made known, Annie looked up from her chains as she glared at both Levi and Erwin. "Hello Annie Leonhardt, we have reason to believe that if you can assist us with a certain case, you might be allowed to be set free," Erwin said, as Annie stared at him with her usual glare. "So, please make sure that we don't need to appropriate you in order to get all the information that we require to get from you. Because if you do, I won't hesitate to kill you faster than you can even think to transform," Levi said, as Annie glared at Levi harder than Erwin. It had been a few hours since Levi and Erwin had entered the dungeons of the Utgard castle within wall rows that Erwin and Levi began their interrogation of Annie Leonhardt. The young woman was clearly not giving them the answers they wanted from her, considering she never answered her questions. It got to the point that Levi activated his ODM gear and started to torture her for information. Erwin didn't want it to come down to this, but he wanted to make sure that they could get all the information they could out of her without killing her. And unfortunately for Annie, and fortunately for Erwin, Levi was just the Titan-killing machine ready for the job. He had lost his entire squad because of Annie, and he needed answers as to why they would need to die all for two people who she barely even knows outside of training. Erwin would ask questions that would pertain to Annie's real identity as Annie Leonhardt, as the girl would only glare at both of them, eliciting a response from Levi to take off her arm and allow it to grow back. During one heated interrogation hour, Levi had decided to take his actions very slowly, enough to the point that he had started to leave scars all over Annie's body just to get an answer out of her. But nothing was seemingly working, so it was here that Erwin had come up with a theory about Annie. If she was an intelligent Titan who could break through their ranks, who's to say that she is the only one? We know about your allies, the Armored Titan as well as the Colossal Titan. You three had managed to bring Titans to District Shiganshina, break through Wall Maria and bring chaos to the walls. So with all this information, how about you tell us what they told us wrong? Erwin asked, as Annie for the first time in the last 10 hours of interrogations gave a confused look to him. We have interrogated your allies, and since they wouldn't give us any information until their own demise. I think you can get the picture. We know about who lives beyond the walls, Erwin said, lying through his teeth. He had no clue as to who Annie Leonhardt's allies were within the walls, he was just bullshitting through this interrogation. As soon as her allies were stated as being killed because of her failure of telling them, she then decided to speak. Without anything else to fight for, she would essentially believe that her allies were dead and there was no bringing them back. Now, what can you tell me about your real identity? Erwin questioned as he took off the gag. My name is Annie Leonhardt. I am an Eldian representative from the country of Marley. They wanted to have us be sent through the walls in hopes of collecting the founding Titan power just so that we could conquer the entire world. Making us sound like heroes to our people, Annie said, as Erwin and Levi stared at her for a moment. "What can you tell us about this country, Marley was it?" Erwin asked, as Annie let out a huff. "They are a corrupt country on the brink of war with the world. They use the Eldian people within their country as foot soldiers as well as Titan creators. Those of us who gain the trust of the Marley government guards are sent through rigorous training to attain a power of a Titan. Reiner Braun had gained the power of the Armored Titan, Bertolt Hoover had gained the power of the Colossal Titan. And a man named Zeke Yeager had gained the power of the Beast Titan. From what my knowledge on Titan powers are, Eren Yeager has gained the power of the Attack Titan. My mission in collecting Eren was to bring him to Marley in order to either turn him to our side, or give his power to someone else," Annie explained as Erwin smirked as well as Levi chuckled. As soon as Annie heard the dark chuckle from Levi, she glared at the man before questioning him about it. "What are you chuckling about?" she growled as Levi started to chuckle even more. "I'm sorry to say this, but thank you for giving us the names of your allies. We never killed them, we had no clue as to who they were. But with this information, we can be sure to keep them from breaking through the walls ever again. Not to mention that we Eldians could be used to create Titans. That is certainly something to lord over everyone in the government here," Levi said, before placing the gag over Annie's face. "I hope you regret killing all those scouts, they had families of their own. Children they had to feed with this job of killing Titans. Because when this is all over, and when our walls are reclaimed from the Titans, you will be facing execution from our government for betrayal of the highest degree," Erwin said, leaving Annie to struggle in her chains in the depths of the castle of Utgard. 1. Comma 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 comma. Deep within the walls of Wall Rose, a massive building that held those within the Scout Regiment had been in wait for the inner walls, Interrogation of Annie Leonhardt to finish. "What are the chances that the female Titan isn't alone in this Michi?" a Scout Regiment captain asked. "The chances of that are low, but at the same time very high. If they were able to get inside the walls, who's to say that they were the only ones to make it in? It is our job to keep an eye on our cadets as well as those within our ranks," Michi said, before sniffing the air. The pungent smell of Titans was making themselves known to the man as he turned to his subordinate and told her to evacuate everyone at the building. Meanwhile, inside of the building, Izuku sat next to Sasha as they brainstormed on what to do with all the time they had on their hands. "So Sasha, what are your plans after this whole interrogation of Annie is getting done?" Izuku asked, as Sasha thought about it. "Well, I was hoping that you'd make a big steak for me tonight," she said, as she stared at Izuku. "I could do that, but I would need your assistance in collecting the bounty," Izuku said, as he placed his arms on the table and laying his head on it. Sasha then laid her head on the table as she closed her eyes, and unknown to Izuku she was able to hear the sounds of massive footsteps coming their way. Sitting upright immediately, she looked to Izuku and all those who were flinching from her sudden height increase before speaking. "Titans are heading this way. We need to inform those who are on the lookout," she called out, as Connie looked to her. "Are you sure that your ears don't need to be cleaned out?" he asked, with a bored tone. "Connie, you should know by now that Sasha never lies about something like this. We need to prepare to leave," Izuku said, getting up from his table. Just as he was about to leave, someone arrived at the window, gaining everyone's attention. "Cadets, report to the horses outside. Titans are on their way over here," the captain called out. Within minutes the entire cadets and whoever remained within the scouts had gathered outside of the building as Michi told them which directions to go to in order to find a breach in the wall. Connie was going to be leading the southern portions of squads in order to see if there was a breach to the south. Sasha was leading her own group over to the north. Izuku would be with Sasha in order to make sure that she stays safe, especially considering the fact she can somehow, someway find a way to get herself into trouble when she isn't even trying. Once all the plans were made, the captain ran up to Michi as they were preparing to leave. "Michi, we have sent everyone on their own directions away from here. What are you going to do?" she asked, as Michi glared at the incoming Titans in the distance. Those of us who give up before the fight can even begin can never hope to survive forever. I will hold the ground here and keep the Titans busy. Once I am able to find my way out of here, I will meet with you at Utgard Castle where they are holding Annie Leonhardt. Michi said, as the woman nodded. Nanaba, Michi called out, as the woman turned around. What is it, Michi? She asked, concerned. Keep Gelger away from the booze and keep him safe. You two will be the only remaining leaders within the scouts who can give orders until I return. Michi said, as he activated his ODM gear and flew towards the Titans in the distance. With that said and done, Nanaba had left Michi to his own devices and allowed him to continue on his suicide mission of holding off the Titans so that they all could escape and find the breach in the wall. 2. Nanaba and the rest of her squad had caught up with some of the other squads making their way north and south of the small base just outside of Walsina. They had just left Michi on his own in order to buy them all enough time to escape the current area they were located at. Let's go. Michi is giving us all the time needed in order to escape. Nanaba called out, as the group headed out in their own directions. Sasha and Izuku heading in one direction and Connie, Reiner and Berthold moving in another direction with their respective squad leaders. Moving as fast as possible, nobody even noticed how there in the distance was the sound screaming back at the base they were all located at previously. As Izuku and Sasha moved towards a nearby village, they saw all the villagers still present as they moved about their business. What are the scouts doing out here? A villager asked, as Izuku stopped his horse. Under the order of the scout regiment, we need you all to leave the village. Titans had seemingly broken through wall rows. Izuku called out, as the civilians immediately took off to the horses. Looking around, Izuku found Sasha moving towards a nearby forest. Hey, what are you doing? Izuku asked, as Sasha stared at it. That's the direction to my village. We need to make sure that everyone there is all right. Sasha called out, as she pushed her horse to move in the forestry. Nanaba, me and Sasha are moving in the forest. Her village is inside on the other end. Izuku called out as Nanaba gave a thumbs up. With that all said and done, Izuku took off on his horse after Sasha, moving as fast as he could in order to catch up with her. None of them had their ODM gear, not that Izuku minded it at the moment. He could use something different from ODM gear. He had a Titan transformation, that he was still getting used to using considering the fact that it took a lot out of him in order to use it at all. He was making his way after Sasha as he finally made it to the outskirts of the village, stopping his horse next to Sasha's. Tying his horse to a stable, Izuku patted his horse, Broccoli, in order to calm him down as Sasha's horse came running towards him. Catching it by the reins, he placed it next to Broccoli so that she could calm down with his own horse's calming presence. Running into the village, Izuku soon found a young girl around the age of about 5 to 7 panting as she noticed his garb. Someone is in the village. PP please help Oni-san, she said, as Izuku immediately took off running. Minutes before Izuku found the girl, Sasha had entered the village where her family lived as she stared at the wrecked place. I can't allow my feelings to get the better of me. I don't have my gear. What's going on over there? Sasha muttered before questioning as she saw movement inside one of the homes. Grabbing a nearby axe so that she could use it for self-defense against something that could hurt both herself and whoever was inside that was a threat, she treaded carefully. She soon entered the home only to find about a 2-meter-tall Titan chowing down on an old woman as her blood spurted everywhere on the ground. Running towards the Titan, silent as can be, Sasha raised the axe where she believed the nape of this Titan would be located. It wouldn't kill it, but it sure as hell would bring its attention from the dying woman to herself, buying whoever was there enough time to escape. But just before she attacked, she saw a small child in the background watching the whole thing as if she just seen the end of the world. Slamming her axe into the Titan's nape multiple times, Sasha had managed to buy enough time for the old woman to use a kitchen knife to stab the Titan in the eye before succumbing to her wounds. Sasha took this moment to grab the little girl and start running towards the road, grabbing some arrows and a bow whilst she ran. We need to run, little one. I have a horse nearby we can use, Sasha spoke before noticing the horse running away. Hey, we are still here. Whistle. Sasha called out and whistled to her horse. Why? The little girl questioned, looking dead inside. Why what? Sasha asked, confused. Why are you helping me? Why did you save me? Everyone in the village is dead. The little girl asked, as Sasha pushed the girl behind her as soon as the two heard footsteps coming from the house they weren't too far away from. I don't need a reason to put my life in danger to protect someone else. Now run. Get someone to help us out, Sasha said, as she pointed her bow and arrow at the Titan. The little girl stared at Sasha for all but a few moments, before Sasha yelled at her to get a move on. And with that the girl ran off towards where the horse had run off to earlier, where she would find Izuku on his way over. What happened, little one? Izuku asked, as the girl didn't say anything but pointed in the direction in a cold sweat. Thank you for telling me where people need help. There are horses just around the corner. I need you to stay hidden there. If you hear a lot of screaming as well as see lightning strike, just know that it is me, Izuku said, as the girl nodded and ran to the stables. Izuku ran harder than he ever did before. Sasha just put herself in the worst kind of danger so far. He will so kick her ass if she dies right now. Just as he turned around the corner, he saw Sasha get grabbed by the Titan as he ran even faster, and he also watched as she used an expert move to get out of the grip of it. As she jumped away from it, Izuku jumped down from his high ground and landed in front of her. Jump away from here, Sasha. I'm going to transform, Izuku called out, as she immediately jumped as far away as she could before the area erupted in smoke and a massive explosion. Whilst inside the explosion, Izuku had been seen to bite down on his hand, causing blood to splash outward, causing a golden-green glow to appear around himself as he built himself a body suitable to fight the 2-meter-tall Titan. As soon as he was standing at his full height, he found himself being a lot smaller than the 17-meter-tall abomination he was capable of previously. He was now standing at 4 meters tall. His armor plating moved about his skin, forming a shield over his body as he pulled out his hands. Crystals appeared around the fingers to show a small, pointed edge over each and every one as he moved in on the Titan. Sasha screaming at him to win all the while. Izuku moved in towards the Titan as he pulled its arms off before moving to its legs. He tore them off and watched as the Titan began to heal its wounds as it tried to stand back up with little success. Izuku then reached around the Titan's head and placed his fingers across a 1 meter by 1 meter area on the nape before slicing it off. With the Titan now dead, he stopped powering his transformation and climbed out of the mouth of it a little exhausted. Running over to Sasha, she found that he had small markings around his eyes and mouth as he stopped near her. Coughing a little due to the steam moving through his system, the two soon arrived at the stables where the girl was waiting for them both. Sasha bade farewell to the village before taking off and meeting up with Nanaba and the rest as they asked what happened in the forest, with Izuku stating that he did what he must in order to protect Sasha and a little girl who remained from the village. Taking the child to where they could evacuate her into the innermost wall, they moved along the outer wall on the north end of the walls themselves to search for a breach. And for the remaining hours of the day, they wouldn't find a breach and actually meet up with Gelger's squad of scouts looking quite confused. Everyone just walked over to Utgard Castle, the place where they all decided to meet up at, and Izuku, with his remaining energy, searched the place. He was making sure that there wasn't anyone else who was here that could cause problems with everyone present. But as soon as he got to the dungeons, he found a severed head of Annie lying on the ground as the rest of her body seemingly twitched in the background. Izuku had been taken so far off guard by the sight, that he moved away from the room and threw up his lunch from earlier that day. Closing the door and locking it up, he ran away from the area, hoping that nobody could come across it on their journey. Looking back at the body now, we see a small trickle of lightning move across it before it fully disappeared. Arriving inside the room where most of the other scouts were located, Izuku took a seat next to Sasha as Nanaba gave the girl her mission. "Alright Sasha, you are to head to the walls and send a message to Commander Erwin Smith as well as Captain Levi," Nanaba said, as Sasha nodded and grabbed the note and took off on her horse. Izuku watched the girl move away from the area as fast as she could in the cover of night, his fears slowly ebbing away as he saw her disappear over the distance. Sighing in relief, he sat down near Ymir, Krista, Connie, Reiner, Berthold, Gelger and Nanaba, whilst a few scouts moved to the top of the building as the moon shone in the night. Did you find anything in the basement of the building, Midoriya? Gelger questioned as Izuku shook his head, face pale. Damn, I was hoping that there'd be some kind of booze here to drink. Gelger said, as he lowered his head in sadness. We can't have you being under the influence right now, Gelger. What if the Titans come here and you are drunker than shit? Nanaba questioned as Gelger defended himself. I will have you know. I had killed more Titans drunker than shit than I had sober. As the group laughed a little, it was here that Connie spoke up about his observations about the village to the south. About how the home where his mother was in had a Titan inside that seemingly talked to him. Seriously, Titans can talk now? I've never heard of that. Nanaba said, as she pulled out a notebook to write this down. I don't know how, but I know she said welcome home to me. Connie retorted as Ymir laughed. Seriously, a talking Titan? What's next? A Titan that can create an explosion so large that it can destroy an entire district with its transformation. Ymir laughed, as Connie told her to shut up. We probably should get some sleep, guys. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. Izuku said, as Connie looked to him. Please tell me that you believe me, Midoriya. Connie pleaded as Izuku sighed. It's probably best that we don't let this cloud our judgment, Connie. I believe you wholeheartedly, but we can't focus on that right now. Izuku said, laying down on the ground. As Connie agreed, some time passes until the moon had reached its highest point within the night when a set of foot stomps on the stairs had alerted Izuku to someone coming. Everyone, wake up, we got Titans moving around the building. A scout called out, causing everyone to panic. Titans are moving in the night. That's preposterous, Gelger called out, as everyone moved out to see what was happening. I didn't see it either until I found that there was movement in the light of the moon. The scout said, before they reached the rooftop. And looking down, the scouts noticed the large number of Titans surrounding the base as Gelger growled audibly. Oi, 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 they're not supposed to be active at night. What the hell is this? Gelger called out, as Nanaba checked her blades and gas. What will we be able to do, Nanaba Kaicho? We can't defend ourselves without a weapon. Reiner called out, as Nanaba looked to Izuku. Midoriya-kun, can you use your transformation at this point in time with full strength? She asked, as Izuku shook his head. I'm sorry, but I am still winded from the amount of movement we had earlier yesterday. Izuku said, as Nanaba nodded. Well, I guess we should show you why we are scouts then. Nanaba said, as everyone stared at her in shock. The woman stood on the edge of the building as she took a blade out from her ODM gear as she stared back at the rest of the group. This is the time we show our ODM gear, she said, before preparing to jump with the other 3 scouts. Let's go, she called out as each and every one jumped from the top of the castle. As all the scouts flew about the area near the castle, the group of newbie scouts had watched in awe as each scout showed their skills in taking down Titan after Titan. Izuku though was more worried about how long they could last against a large group of Titans such as this. There was only so much gas they could scrounge up from the nearby supply bases when they appeared on their way to the castle itself. He kept to himself as Connie called out something to his attention as he pointed in a direction of another Titan that was larger than the rest. That's a really big-ass Titan. And look, he's going towards the wall. Connie called out, as Izuku stared at the third Titan. Looking at Reiner and Bertholdt, he saw something he had never seen on their faces when looking at a specific Titan. Pure fear. Hey, are you two alright? You seem to have seen a ghost. Izuku asked, placing a hand on one of their shoulders, gaining the two's attention. Nothing. Just that Titan is larger than most Titans we've seen. Not to mention it seems to be intelligent from how it looks. Bertholdt said, in a rush. Izuku was leery about Bertholdt's rushed explanation, but he couldn't push away the fact that the Titan with the fur seemed intelligent in nature from how it looked. If anything, the Titan itself looked more akin to a furry ape than a Titan, but looking at the arms and legs, it resembled an orange ape from what he had seen from Armin's notes about animals outside the walls. About 15 minutes later, Izuku and the others would find that Gelger and Nanaba were the last 2 scouts remaining from the fight. Izuku reached a hand out for them to get some help, but they were just too far out of reach. But it wouldn't be long before Gelger stated that he had just wished for some booze before he lost the strength to fight anymore with his broken blades. Nanaba, not wanting to lose an ally so fast, managed to fly around the Titan itself and kill it, breaking her blades in the process. As Gelger was tossed into a portion of the castle that was destroyed, Nanaba landed lower than before as she tried to use her gas to escape, only for her gas to fail her at this moment as she gained a slightly worried look before feeling a presence behind herself. Turning around, she found a massive group of Titans staring at her as if she was a primed full-course meal for them. Inside the building, Gelger would manage to find the booze he had wished for, only to be grabbed by a Titan from outside and pulled out, smacking his head on the bricks from the back. Izuku and the rest of the remaining scouts at the castle would look down at the scene in front of them. Nanaba fighting her best in order to stay alive, as Gelger was being pushed into a Titan's mouth. Izuku had enough at this point as he tried to rush to the edge and jump down to help them all, as Ymir of all people had placed her arms around his chest and pulled him back. "Don't jump down there, idiot. You could get yourself killed. Are you still unaware of the fact that your body is still steaming?" Ymir called out, as Izuku looked down at himself. And sure enough, his hands and body was still steaming from the amount of energy he had used earlier that day. "Well, what do you expect me to do? Let them both die horrible deaths when I can help them. I don't care if it gets me hurt, I need to save them," Izuku said, as Ymir gave him a hardened glare. "Well, what will Sasha think when she finds out you died trying to save our squad leaders?" Ymir asked, playing the worst card on her belt. Izuku immediately went limp in her arms as she placed him on the ground, where he slammed his fist into the wall. They heard the sounds of movement on the wall as everyone looked over to find some of the Titans climbing it to get to where they are located. "If we are going to have a plan where we fight back, we better make one fast. 'Cause any more damage to this place and we will die," Connie called out, as Ymir looked at the knife in his hand. "Hey, give that to me," she said, as Connie stared at her in confusion. "Sure, but what are you going to do with that?" he asked, looking at her as she moved slowly over to the edge. "I'm gonna use this to fight," she said, as she looked to Krista one last time. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" Ymir asked, as Krista looked at Ymir. "What is it?" she asked. "When this is all over, tell your real name," Ymir said, causing Izuku and the others to look at her like she is crazy. "Okay, but what are you going to do? What can a knife do against a Titan?" Krista asked, as Ymir smirked. "This," she said, as she jumped off the building. Krista watched on in horror, same with Izuku and Connie as Ymir transformed in midair as she landed in the middle of the Titan horde. "Raya!" Ymir's Titan form screamed out, as we see her claws as well as sharp teeth. 7. We start out within a moment before Ymir jumped from the roof of Utgard Castle. The woman was hesitating when she looked at the Titans below as she moved the knife across her finger. She remembered a moment back when she was in training, when she and Daz had gotten lost within the snowy forest of the training camp. We find all the cadets had arrived within the safe cabin as they try and warm themselves up within the building next to the campfire, as we see Ymir and Krista standing nearby in the snow. Krista, you need to give it up," Ymir said, as the two walked along the small snow path. Krista continued down the path with a determined expression on her face as she pulled along an unconscious Daz as he had succumbed to the cold early on in the trail. "Listen to me," Ymir said, as Krista gained an angered expression. "Never," she said, as she continued on her path. "Daz already has one foot in the grave. It's his own fault for doing this training to boost his score, without knowing how much his body could take," Ymir said, as she continued to walk behind Krista. "He's just not cut out to be a soldier. If you keep crawling to the foot of this mountain at this rate, he'll probably be a goner by then, and we'll be lucky not to be," Ymir said, once again holding her torch in front of the shorter woman. "Which means there's only two outcomes. Leave Daz here and save ourselves, or all three of us die. Which will it be? Ymir said, deadly blunt. Krista had widened eyes when she heard Ymir state these words before she gained a glint in her eyes. You forgot one option. That your prediction is entirely wrong. I'll be able to reach our base in time at the bottom of the mountain, with Daz. Krista said, as Ymir was quiet for a moment. You can go on ahead of us and get back there safe. How about that? There's no trouble in it for you. We'll make it back for sure. Go on ahead of us. Krista asked, as Ymir gained an annoyed look on her face. Krista continued to walk forwards through the snow until she tripped on some of it, falling to a knee before standing back up to walk again. Ymir took off her mask before speaking to the still walking Krista. Hey, why haven't you asked me to help you at all? Ymir asked, as Krista continued walking determined to reach her goal. I think you have no intention of saving Daz. Ymir guesses, causing Krista to stop walking and continue looking forwards. Taking a chance to glance over at Ymir, she sees the annoyance as well as anger displayed in Ymir's expression as the two stares into one another's eyes. You don't care. You've resigned yourself to your death already. Ymir said, as Krista looks away eyes wide. Ymir moved closer to the girl in order to get her to look into her eyes as she spoke again, trying to coax Krista to speak. You're hoping to die here, aren't you? How could you? She asked, as Krista continued to look forwards. I thought you were a good girl. You've gotta at least make it look like you're trying to save his life. If you want people to remember you as a hero who died trying to save someone, don't drag him down with you. That's what a bad girl would do. Ymir said as Krista finally reacted as she grabbed Ymir's jacket. You're wrong. I didn't. That's not, Krista said, before dropping her arm down and looking at the snow on the ground. It's you, right, the mistress's daughter who had people after your life. Ymir said, as Krista gasped silently with a small flinch. How did you know? She asked, definitely nervous. I see. So it was you, after all. Ymir said, as we get a view of their torch. It's something I happened to overhear. At a church in the interior, back when I snuck around borrowing things to stay alive. What a sob story it was. An illegitimate child can't succeed a powerful noble. So they just wanted to kill her, to end all the fuss once and for all. But they'd look aside if she changed her name and lived a humble life. In the end I heard the girl was forced to enter the cadet corps. Don't you worry, I haven't told anyone, and I don't plan to either. Ymir said, as Krista looked worriedly at Ymir. Then, did you enter the cadet corps just to find me? If that's the case. Why? She asks as Ymir spoke up. Who knows? Maybe because we're similar. Ymir said, offhandedly as Krista gasped again. What? You and me have similar backgrounds? Krista asked, confused. Well, more or less. Ymir said, not denying nor accepting. That's the reason you became a soldier? Krista asked again. Could be. I don't really know. No, it's not. Ymir said, with a sigh. You wanted to become friends with me? Krista asked, throwing a bone for Ymir. You have got to be kidding me. You and I can't even compare. We both got a second chance at life. But I'm not the one who took on a fake name. If I abandon my name and reject who I am, they win. I'm going to keep the name I have and make the best of my life. That's the only way I can have my revenge. So how do you explain yourself? Are you gonna commit suicide and make everyone who ruined your life happy? Why is your desire to kill aimed at yourself? If you're so eager, use that passion to change your own fate. Ymir said, as Krista stared at her with concern. I can't. Even now, there's no way the three of us will make it out of here alive. Krista said, as Ymir turned around and walked as she spoke. There is, she said, bluntly. Krista asked, as she continued to follow Ymir. I can see the base straight down from here. We dropped Daz off this cliff. Ymir said, with conviction. What? Krista asked in alarm. Hopefully he survives the fall, and hopefully someone down there finds him. Sure, it might be a long shot, but that's his only chance now. Unless some miracle happens, he'll be an icicle long before you drag him down. Ymir said, as Krista spoke up. But But he'll surely die if he falls. Krista said, trying to keep Daz alive. Shut up, Ymir called out, picking up Krista and walking away with her. Hey wait, Ymir, Krista called out, as Ymir spoke again. I will do it myself, so get moving already. Ymir called out, throwing Krista on the snow. As snow fell on top of her, she struggled to escape from it before noticing Ymir not present. It can't be. Wait, Ymir, wait, Krista called out, struggling to climb up the snow. Arriving at the top of the cliff, she noticed that Ymir was nowhere to be seen anymore. Even more terrifying is that Daz was nowhere to be seen as well. Walking down the mountain by herself, Krista would find Ymir sitting on a small wooden log waiting for her as the two conversed about what she had done. Ymir stating that she had done something wrong, and it was here that Krista asked what had happened to Daz. She doesn't say anything before looking to the cabin not too far away from them both as Krista lets out a soft exhale. Looking back at the cliff, she asked how Ymir got down as the woman didn't say a thing, but if anything, the fact that Krista was talking as if the fact that Ymir didn't have any gear to get her and Daz down, it could only mean one thing. Standing up, Ymir moved in front of Krista with her back to the young blonde as she spoke up. Why not? I think I can trust you. However, promise me, when I reveal my secret to everyone, promise me. Take back your old name and live. Ymir said, grabbing the shoulders of Krista with hope in her eyes. Krista widened her eyes once more as she stared into the serious brown of Ymir's own. As this promise was stated, the sun appeared off in the distance over the mountain, shining over the two in a blinding light. We return back to Utgard Castle as Ymir runs over to the edge of the roof of Utgard Castle as she jumped over it and down towards the Titans below. Ymir, Krista called out, as she reached a hand out for the woman. As Ymir fell down towards the jaws of death itself, she had a few thoughts before she used her weapon. Krista, I felt the same, that it would have been better if I wasn't born at all. I was hated by the world just for existing. To give countless people joy, I gave up my life. Ymir thought as she pulled the knife on her hand as blood squirted onto her forehead. But from that time, there was a wish I held within my heart. If someday I was given a second chance at life, this time, I would live for no one but myself. With her finished thought, Ymir's human body began to transform into that of a Titan. It was a 4-meter-tall Titan with brown hair that was medium length and held black sclera and white pupils. The newly formed Titan fell into the horde of much larger and some smaller Titans as she tore some of them to shreds from their napes. Grabbing onto the first Titan's neck, she bit down into it before spitting the skin and muscle underneath out before hopping to another one and killing it the same way. Backflipping faster than some Titans could react, she landed on the back of another Titan as she killed it via biting its nape off. She roared a little as some nearby Titans moved closer to her location. Looking back at the rooftop, Izuku and Connie were staring at Ymir's Titan transformation with awe. Connie, though, was a little more wary. Ymir is a Titan, too? He asked, with fear written on his face. That Titans, Krista muttered as Reiner and Bertholdt's faces were the definition of shocked. That Titans, Reiner muttered in shock. From that day. Bertholdt muttered as well before Izuku spoke. Guys, we have much bigger issues. Izuku called out, as everyone looked down at the fight. Some Titans that Ymir couldn't kill in time were trying to break apart the castle, as Izuku grunted before standing upright once again. Guys, make sure that you don't fall from this roof. Izuku said, as everyone looked at him in shock and confusion. What are you planning? Krista asked, running to Izuku. I'm going to assist Ymir as best as I can, but I won't be able to last long. At best, I would take the Titans off her back long enough for her to kill them all. I will be using the last of my energy doing this though. Izuku said, jumping off the roof just as Ymir's Titan stared at him in awe. Ymir continued to take down Titan after Titan as she started to become overwhelmed. It was here that another lightning strike happened so close to the castle that Ymir had to literally jump out of the way as a 15-meter-tall version of Izuku's armored Warhammer Titan landed on the ground with a roar. As this happened, a Titan had tried to lunge at him from the front as he dodged the strike, and the Titan landed in the castle itself. As it rumbled, Izuku turned around and created some weird crystal from his axe as it covered the damage and froze the Titan in place, incapable of moving from its position. Izuku's Titan form then began his own counterattack as he punched and kicked some nearby Titans away from the castle. His roars were enough to bring all the Titans in the area to his spot as they decided he was the better meal to have. Ymir's Titan at the moment took this as her chance to grab the others and escape whilst Izuku did his job as bait. Climbing up the tower, Ymir herself had looked at each of the people who were looking at her in both awe as well as Izuku's Titan form in awe and fear. "Want live? Grab me," she said, as the group grabbed pieces of her hair as Ymir had bounded off. Landing on the ground nearby, the group and Ymir's Titan heard the sounds of Izuku's Titan screaming in pain. Looking over, they were horrified with what they had saw. Izuku's Titan form was deformed now, and he was barely kicking multiple Titans away as he struggled to move away from the group that was remaining. There was at least 10 Titans left as he limped over near them, one of his legs completely crippled as they had started to pull on it earlier in the fight. As soon as his Titan was near enough to collapse next to them, they watched as a mass of steam burst out from his mouth and Izuku's body was catapulted towards Ymir's Titan. Reacting as fast as she could, Ymir's Titan form could only do one thing. She opened her maw and caught him in her mouth. With that, the group continued to run away from the castle, as what remained of Izuku's little crystal had faded away and Utgard castle had fell to the ground. With the scout regiment, they were all making their way to Utgard castle where Sasha had stated their group was located last. But as they were running, they heard the telltale sounds of Titans roaring in the distance and increased their speed to make it there. But they stopped when they sat a 4-meter-tall Titan with brown hair with those who were at Utgard castle in her hair. Of those was an unconscious Izuku covered in slime as Krista was holding onto his unconscious form. As the Titan stopped in front of the scouts, they prepared to attack it when Krista called out to them all. "Wait, don't attack her, it's Ymir," and with that everyone stared at her like she grew a second head. But as soon as that happened, a boatload of steam come from the nape of Ymir's Titan as it revealed the woman inside as she called out to the scouts. "I don't know if you want to hear what happened, but we really need to leave," Ymir called out, as more Titans appeared from the forest behind them. The scouts left Mikasa, Armin, Eren and Moblet to look after those on Ymir's Titan as the rest of them took down the remaining Titans that were giving chase. Once everything calmed down, everyone was wondering what in the fuck was happening considering there wasn't any breach that they could find. It wasn't until Izuku woke up that he stated there was no breach and that both squads of Nanaba and Gelger looked on the north side of Wall Rose, as well as south side of Wall Rose only to come up short. With all this information, the young man fell asleep considering his stamina for the day was all used up. Armin, though, made sure to keep him away from Reiner and Bertholdt since the two were looking at Izuku with a look he didn't like. It wouldn't be until around noon when everyone would make it on top of the wall and be safe from the Titans once more. Izuku was out of commission at the moment, and there wasn't anything he could do right now other than get enough sleep to transform again should he need it. As the scouts moved all the people from Utgard Castle to the wall, they were watching closely as Ymir and Izuku were lifted as their bodies were covered in a scout's cape. The two were sleeping soundly as their chests rose and fell softly, although in terms of injuries, Izuku had the worst amount considering he was looking the worst for wear. His eyes were nearly sunken in, his cheekbones were showing, not to mention it looked as if he hadn't eaten in days. He was moving in and out of consciousness every few minutes, and it was easy to tell that he was trying to stay awake. Once the scouts had informed him that he and the others were getting him on the wall, he finally relented and decided to fall asleep for the time being. This was another drawback that the scouts figured about Izuku's Titan transformation: if he did it more than twice it was very harmful towards his health. So here they all were walking on top of the wall as they made their way back to a nearby district so they could retreat inside Wall Sina. The scouts could only make it around maybe 100 meters before they heard some commotion from behind them. And they could see that Reiner and Bertholdt had pulled Eren back in order to speak to him alone. Mikasa was nearby looking at the two with the deadliest glare that anyone could see, and Armin was attempting to do his best in order to have the woman not have the three boys notice her glare. But with Izuku, Ymir and Krista, the two girls were talking to one another as they looked at Izuku's damaged form. His body was releasing steam in massive quantities, and as both girls stared at his sunken-in eyes, she thought back to the fight at Utgard Castle. "I will distract the Titans to allow Ymir to get you all out. I don't care if I die. Then that just means that you all escaped." Izuku's voice rang out. "Why does he always have to play hero? It's not like it's his job or anything." Ymir questioned as she moved some of Izuku's curls out of his face. "It's not his fault, Ymir. He's stated it many times already, he just can't help it. When someone is in trouble he has to help, no matter the cost," Krista said, as Ymir looked at her. "By the way, you told me that you'd tell me your real name. What is it?" Ymir asked, looking into the crystal blue eyes of Krista. "My real name is Historia Reese," she said, as Ymir smirked. "So your real name is Historia, be sure to have everyone else call you that," Ymir said, as she focused on what was getting everyone's attention. Reiner and Bertholdt were talking to Eren, and everyone was watching the trio very closely to see what would happen. But by the time Eren spoke up towards the two other boys, they heard him make a statement about how they were just tired. Bertholdt just stated that it was right and they were just really tired, but Reiner didn't move from his spot. He was seemingly calling himself out on how horrible he was, talking about how if he hadn't just stayed here for 3 years, he wouldn't have become such a half-assed piece of shit. And once that was uttered, all hell broke loose as Reiner revealed his steaming arm as the bite wound from a Titan back at the castle had healed instantly. "I see. I've just been here way too long. I've been living surrounded by idiots for 3 whole years now. We were just kids. We didn't know anything. I wished I'd never learned that there were people like this. That way, I never would have such a half-assed piece of shit," Reiner said, as Bertholdt had stared at Reiner in worry and fear. Eren noticed something about Reiner's arm as the man started to remove the makeshift bandages that were covering the bit wound. "I can't tell what the right thing to do is anymore. The only option I'm left with is to face the consequences of my actions and fulfill my duty to the bitter end as a warrior," Reiner said, revealing his steaming arm. Eren stared at the arm in confusion as well as shock before Bertholdt spoke up to Reiner as he was preparing for a fight. "Reiner, are we doing it right here, right now?" Bertholdt called out, as Reiner nodded his head. "Yeah, we settle this right here, right now," Reiner said, as he moved in on Eren's position. As Eren was still in shock about everything, Mikasa appeared behind Eren with the deadliest glare she could give as she was mid-swing with her blade. And as she fully extended her swing on the lowered guard of Reiner, she sliced through his arm and slightly into his neck. "Gawa," Reiner called out, blood spurting out of his wounds. Mikasa then moved in on Bertholdt as she sliced through his guarded neck and as he fell to the ground spoke over to Eren in an urgent voice. "Grag!" Bertholdt screamed in pain, blood spurting out of his wound. "Eren, run!" Mikasa would scream before being punted off the wall as she connected a line to it. "Bertholdt," Reiner called out, as the young man held his wounded neck in pain as some tears were falling down his eyes. As Eren stood in complete shock and awe, the air around him became layered with an ozone feel as Reiner and Bertholdt had started to glow. An orange-colored lighting covered the area in a small glow before lightning itself fell from the sky, blasting some of the scouts off the walls. He was blasted back before grabbing onto the edge of the wall as 2 titans emerged from the lightning itself. The 2 roared out to the heavens as Eren finally lost his grip on the wall before being grabbed by an armored hand. A massive exodus of steam had blasted out from the Colossal Titan as it reached a hand out to grab someone. The group of scouts nearby had been blown back, the only ones who weren't blasted off being Historia and Ymir, and they watched as Izuku, still in his cot, had woken up immediately before being grabbed in the air. And everyone watched as the Colossal Titan had grabbed a random scout as well before placing both into his own mouth and locking his jaw immediately. Within the mouth of the Colossal Titan, Izuku was placed underneath the tongue of the Titan as the heat of the mouth immediately knocked him out once again. On the outside, everyone screamed for Izuku's name as he was seemingly eaten by the Colossal Titan. Ymir tried to transform again only to have a problem with it as she couldn't do it anymore, and it was here that the armored titan had jumped from the wall in order to make an escape. As the armored titan was falling down the wall, Eren was staring at Rainer's eyes as he felt memories flood his mind. When he was still in training for the 104th Cadet Corps, as he went to a small lake nearby as Reiner and Bertholdt had accompanied him and Armin to teach him how to properly use the ODM gear in secret. The trio had talked about everything they wanted to do once they became scouts, Eren stating that he will find and kill each and every titan that came across his path to freedom. But most importantly finding the Colossal Titan and killing them. Armin talked about exploring the world outside the walls. With such an innocent outlook on life, Reiner and Bertholdt had spoken about returning back to their home. But that was all they talked about, before the two men looked at Eren and Armin with a smile on their face, brimming with determination. You damn traitors, Eren called out as he bit his hand. The effect was immediate, his body started to steam up as his hand healed from the bite wound. A massive body of steam was created from nothing as lightning struck around the hand of the armored titan. Forming from the feet up, by the time it had arrived around Eren it formed a small compass on his body as he reared his arm back, his titan form doing the same as soon as his hair came up. And with a loud roar, Eren's titan had thrown his fist out to smash the armored titan in the face. Izuku woke up laying down on a tree branch. He looked around the area only to find that he was surrounded by titans on the lower levels of the tree. Sitting upright as fast as possible, without hurting himself, he looked over at Reiner and Bertholdt as they stared at him in worry. Looking to his right, Izuku found Eren sleeping against the tree next to him as Izuku went to stand up from the ground. But looking down he found that his forearms were gone, ending at the elbow as he stared at the small bits of blood dripping as well as the steam seemingly held underneath his coat. Pulling his coat away, a massive burst of steam had moved away and through the area as he noticed his legs were in tip-top shape. Standing up on the branch, Izuku walked over to Eren as he shook him slightly to try and wake him up from his slumber. "Eren, are you all right?" "Eren," Izuku said, as Reiner spoke. "He will be asleep for the rest of the day, he gave me one hell of a fight," Reiner said, as Izuku looked over at them. "What are you talking about? Where's the scouts?" Izuku asked, confusedly. "I'm not sure how to say this, Midoriya-kun, but you are our prisoner now," Bertholdt said, as Izuku sat there. "So you are the traitors that broke through the walls," Izuku surmised as the two stayed silent. "Ah, it makes so much sense right now," Izuku said, as he sat down again. He was seemingly in a bit of some thought processing as he looked back at the two again before he spoke. "So, is there a reason as to why you are holding me prisoner?" Izuku asked, as both young men looked at one another before speaking. "We originally wanted to grab Ymir, but she was too far away. But you on the other hand, have both my power as well as one of our allies' powers. We cannot allow you to move through the cracks," Reiner said as he rubbed his chin. The young man was thinking to himself about something as Izuku looked at his arms. They were slowly regenerating from where they originally were at the moment, and he could see some bone sticking out of it as it was reforming the nerves as well as muscle there. Pushing his arms through his cape, he decided to keep that development to himself should the need arise for him to take Eren and run. He will not be taking on Reiner and Bertholdt on low energy. Even though he had the best nap of his life, he was using energy to heal himself. He needed a way to get both him and Eren out of here. Some time passed as Izuku could finally feel his hands as he looked down into his coat and found them both completely healed. Just a bit red and tender from just reforming from complete nothingness, and as he stared at Reiner and Bertholdt, he found Eren was now awake. And for some reason he was talking mad shit to them about finding the best possible way to kill them. And for some reason, Izuku felt that this would be premeditated if Eren had continued this talk and just chopped the back of his neck, silencing him for the moment. Looking around the forest, Izuku could feel the titans nearby as Reiner and Bertholdt gathered the energy they needed to move on. It hadn't been more than a few hours when a shot was fired into the sky as it was green in color and Izuku couldn't wait to start running with Eren. Grabbing the young man by the waist, Eren started screaming as Izuku bit down on his hand as he fell towards the ground. "Eren, I need you to hide on my upper neck, I will cover it with my armored hands before we escape," Izuku said, before transforming into his full Titan form. "Alright, just make sure to lose those two bastards," Eren said, as he landed on Izuku's armored chest and climbed to the neck portion. Placing two hands over Eren's placement, Izuku took off as he overheard a transformation behind himself. Turning his head slightly, he found his counterpart running towards him at full speed as he increased his own. Both armored titans were running towards the smoke signal flare as they broke through the trees as Izuku pulled Eren out of his neck and kept him within his hand. He felt some movement on his nape as well as head as he looked at the new arrivals. It was the scouts, and more importantly Mikasa as well as the rest of their friends. There was even claws sitting on his neck as he looked to his right to find Ymir in her own transformation staring into his eyes. "Eren, do you have him?" The Titan spoke as Izuku nodded his own. Holding up his fist, it was shown that Eren was covering his eyes as Mikasa grabbed him and flew off towards her horse and took him away as far as she could. Turning around, Izuku stared at the incoming Reiner as he pushed his arms out in a wide tackle formation as Ymir jumped from him with the rest of the scouts doing the same. As soon as Reiner tackled Izuku to the ground, the young armored titan had rolled across the ground as he flipped Reiner in the air, sending him further away from Mikasa and Eren. The two armored titans moved in on one another as they sent out attacks on the other. Reiner had thrown a right hook which was grabbed and pulled by Izuku. He then grabbed Reiner's head and slammed it into his armored kneecap as he swept the titan's feet out from under him as a loud crash was heard from the titan. Izuku then grabbed the titan by his feet and picked him up, and over his shoulder and threw him towards the forest. As Reiner smashed through multiple trees, he skipped across the area before stopping just shy of a really huge tree before finding another titan nearby. Grabbing it, he threw it as hard as he could towards Izuku as he dodged the titan immediately. Unknown to him though, it started to run after Mikasa and Eren, and it had an unnatural smile on its face too. Rushing towards Reiner, Izuku sent a flurry of quick jabs as well as kicks to Reiner, who had parried and sent a flurry of his own. Izuku used his Warhammer power as he formed a bone-like structure of a set of brass knuckles as he attacked Reiner again. Each punch Izuku sent out released a shockwave in the background as Reiner dodged to the best of his ability. Reiner sent a punch at Izuku's titan's jaw, causing it to connect, and Izuku's face turned the slightest bit before turning back to Reiner and sending a blow to his stomach. The punch literally picked him up and sent him down through the forest again, and as Reiner got back up once more, he started to just throw titans at Izuku. Over with Mikasa and Eren, they were looking at the titan that started their journey into becoming scouts. It smiled down at them as Eren and Mikasa went to try and fight it, before Hannes had suddenly shown up. Flying around it, he attacked its Achilles heel before flying up in the air as he called out to the two of them. "You both get out of here. I will end this creature once and for all," he cried out, as he sliced through its hand and sliced through its elbow, knocking the arm off. As soon as Mikasa and Eren ran off into the distance, they were unaware of the two more titans coming for Hannes. All around the fields, scouts, military police, and garrison regiment cadets and leaders were fighting off a giant horde of titans. Armin was helping Jean in taking down a few titans before Jean himself was smacked by a titan's hand, knocking him to the ground with a head injury. Erwin and Levi were moving throughout the horde of titans as if they were on a mission, and Hange was moving with Moblet as they tried to capture some titans as well. It was pandemonium as the scouts did their best to hold off the titans in order to keep Eren safe. Finally, we return back to Izuku and Reiner's fight, as both titans were breathing heavily. Reiner had to transform twice whilst Izuku stayed in his first transformation. He had to be very careful with his own transformations since they could cause harm if he continued to do this. Izuku ran towards Reiner's titan as he sent out a faint right hook that Reiner fell for, and as he attempted to grab Izuku's arm, Izuku had thrown his left and it landed on Reiner's nape, causing irreparable damage to the titan. He then spun around and kicked Reiner's titan form into the forest to never be seen from again as Bertholdt had flown after him since Reiner's titan form was knocked out. Turning back to the others, Izuku had ran towards the Titans that were gathering around a large group of scouts and killed each, one by one. Once he finished that, they used their gear to get up on top of him before they all heard a very loud scream. Looking over at the Titans that were stuck looking at Eren, they found a smiling Titan looking at Eren with confusion in its eyes. That was before each and every other Titan had jumped at the smiling one and started to consume it. Izuku ran towards Eren and picked both him and Mikasa up as soon as the entire remnants of the garrison, military police, and scout regiments had climbed aboard him as they moved away and back towards the walls. As they ran though, Ymir's Titan was looking back at the forest before for some reason, she ran off to find Bertholdt and Reiner. It was as if something was calling to her, and as Krista Historia had tried to run after her, Connie stopped her before it was too late. The entire group ran off as Ymir ran in the direction of which Izuku had thrown Reiner's Titan in the forest, as Krista Historia had screamed out Ymir's name. Thinking back on it though, Izuku had felt something akin to a trembling feeling up his spine when he heard Eren scream out in the air. And he could have sworn that he felt something akin to lightning moving through his veins as if he was given an order from the highest being possible. He shook this off though as he tried to focus on getting back to the walls. The scouts had called their horses by now, allowing him to exit his transformation from the mouth once more as he jumped down to a horse below. Surprisingly, he found Sasha's horse amongst the group as he gave him some love as the horse neighed in happiness. The rest of the scouts would look back on this suicide mission to retrieve Eren with something akin to pride as they managed to save not only one Titan shifter that was on their side, but two. Izuku and the rest of the scouts were inside a small cottage as Erwin was called into Stohess district for something important. They had no clue as to what they needed Erwin for as they were making great strides in reclaiming lost land to the Titans. So having their leader brought before the king sounded very suspicious for the entire scout regiment. And at the current moment the group were making plans on how to continue forward with some of their forces reduced to just a small amount since the last excursion to reclaim Eren and Izuku from the hands of Reiner and Bertholdt. As they all conversed within the cottage, Levi walked through the doors with Hange as they gave some news that were shocking to the group. It appears that Pastor Nick was murdered within police custody last night. Levi said, as Izuku stared at him with confusion. I thought he was someone who worked for the government. Considering how close he was in terms of the trial of me and Izuku, he tried to have us both killed. Izuku said, as Levi nodded his head. As it turned out, he knew about the fact that there were Titans that made up each and every wall that had been placed as our protection from the Titans. So now we are asking the singular question that is on our mind. If humans are what's needed to create a Titan, does that mean that the walls are all Titans? Hange stated as everyone nodded along. So what does this mean about mine and Izuku's safety? Eren asked, concerned as both looked at one another. Well, we will need to leave the area. Erwin has been arrested for treason against the country of Eldia. Have no idea how that happened, but it appears that we are getting close to the answers that Erwin's been asking since he became the leader of the scouts. They intend on killing him in front of everyone within Stohess district later on this week. So we need to leave as the military police are coming to try and kill what remains of the scout regiment. As of now, we are criminals. Levi stated as the group had prepared their things to leave. Off in the mountain nearby, two soldiers of the military police had been watching over their conversation, incapable of hearing what they were talking about but had a vague idea. They left the area before they could be sensed by Levi as well as Hange in order to inform their superiors about the scout regiment's Levi squad's location. Comma 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 comma. Deep within an interrogation chamber, Erwin stared at the wall as he had bruises all over his face as well as upper chest. His one arm was chained to the wall as he stared off into the distance with a blank look as he was looking into a memory that he had always kept close to his chest. It was a memory of when he asked his father about the outside world, and how those questions had gotten his own father to question everything about Eldia before being killed for just asking questions about the outside world. Shaking his head, he was visited by Hange, who was playing close to the government as she was going to be placed as the new head of the scouts when Erwin was executed in front of the populace of Stohess district. Hello Erwin, are they treating you with grace? Because it doesn't look like they are respecting you. Hange asked as Erwin shook his head. I don't have much time left within this world if this keeps going. We need to make sure that we overthrow the government. They won't allow the scouts to leave the walls with funding for what could be our last expedition outside the walls. Erwin said, as he sat upright. So, what are your plans for this to happen? Hange questioned as Erwin stared at the closed door as the two guards looked at them. I can't explain here, but meet me at this address. There are people within the government that aren't capable of being trusted, but be sure to inform Pixis and Nile about these actions. Erwin said, as Hange nodded her head. With her conversation with Erwin done for the day, she left the old man to his devices as she traveled to where the new base of operations for the scouts were located. She had seen what the military police had done after the group had left the cottage. They had broken down the door as well as burned the house to the ground. They were very close to their location that time, and it would only be a matter of time before they found their new base. She shook her head as she rode her horse to Utgard Castle as she began to think about the new weapons she was making for their excursion outside the walls. This would be their last official expedition outside the walls, based on what Erwin had stated in his notes given to her. Some of them were just scribbles to her, so she couldn't read them. But most could be read by her, and she was surprised by the new weaponry that was to be made for them in order to take on the armored Titan when they arrive. Not only that, but Levi's own weapons were to be upgraded in order to not be broken on any kind of crystal and fur. That came from a new threat to the walls. A beast-like Titan that could throw rocks. Hange arrived at the new base of operations for the scouts as she stopped at the stable and entered the old building, seeing the group move about the place cleaning. She found Levi drinking tea in his unique way as she gained his attention and sat down near him. So, what did the old man want this time? Levi questioned as Hange smiled at him. It seems like your blades are being upgraded to their maximum potential. And the rest of the scouts will be getting new weaponry that can break the armor of the armored Titan, Reiner Braun. Hange said, giving the notes to Levi himself to read. Okay, so what is the plans for breaking Erwin out of prison? I know that we can't move him with his injured state at the moment, but we will need some more information that requires us to overthrow the current king. Levi said, placing the papers down. Let Erwin come up with that. What you all need to do is find out what the military police are doing with forces that are above their pay grade. Hange said, with a serious expression. There's a new player within the military police. Levi questioned, intrigue on his face. Yes, they say that they brought a man from the underground into the military police and gave him his own task force. Hange said, as Levi stiffened slightly. So they really brought him up here. I can't imagine how he would react to seeing me as an enemy as of right now. Levi said as he drank some tea. Who is it that you're talking about, Levi? Hange asked, confusion written all over her features. Ackerman, Kenny, Levi said, as we move into Stohes district. Comma 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 comma. Nile Dok had been moving throughout his building as he heard movement from outside his main operations room. Opening the door, he soon found a strange man wearing a cowboy hat enter the room with an enigmatic smirk on his face as he took a seat in one of the chairs. Nile sat down at his seat as he looked at the new arrival with concern as well as wariness of that of a man with more years added to his life. Who are you, and why are you within my regiment chambers? Nile questioned as the man smiled before kicking his feet onto Nile's desk. Who am I? Well, I am the man who is taking over for you. You see, you are about to go out on a vacation of sorts. Don't worry about your base, I will take good care of her. King's orders, the man said, revealing his blue eyes that gleamed with promise of pain should Nile refuse. The king had told you to send me out on a vacation away from my job. Who are you? Nile questioned with fury written on his face. The name's Kenny, that is all you need to know. And I will be training some of your men to become monsters in the battlefield. Send out your forces and we will begin soon, Kenny said, as he stood up and pulled out a flask of whiskey. As soon as Kenny left the room, Nile looked at the small letter from Erwin. His old friend from when they were cadets. Picking it up, he had called his forces to meet Kenny outside in the courtyard as he informed them all about how the king wishes for him to take a break from his job. and that he would be leaving Kenny in his place to train them to become monsters, as the man informed him whilst he was gone. He also informed them to make sure that they make the right decisions whilst under Kenny's control within the regiment. And as soon as he left the building, he made his way towards the location written on the note that was sent to him by Hange Zoe of the Scouts. He spent a good portion of his morning walking around Stohes district to the location that he was given, and as soon as he knocked on the door, he found Pixis standing in the middle of the room as the man opened the door. "Ah, Nile, it's been a long while since all the leaders of the military had been in one room together," Pixis said, pulling a flask of rum out of his pocket. "It's been a while, Pixis. How have you been since the Battle of Trost?" Nile questioned as the man chuckled. "It's only been a few months since then. I'm surprised that we have discovered so much since then about the outside world. We found out that there was a real-life female Titan, not to mention the identities of the armored, Colossal and the female Titan all within a week of one another," Pixis said, stroking his mustache. "Speaking of the female Titan, what happened to the user of that power?" "I was told that she was eaten by a Titan," Nile questioned as Erwin entered the room. "That's because her death was very secretive. She was killed by Levi Ackerman, because she was too big a threat for her to stay alive. With her in play, it is impossible to see if she can be of use to us as of right now. Now, what we really need to ask is how we are going to overthrow the government," Erwin said, with a completely serious face. "What? Question mark. What in the hell has gotten into you, Erwin? There is no way that I am joining you on that suicide mission to overthrow our government." Question mark quote. Nile called out, furious. "Nile, do you remember the woman that we both fell for?" Erwin questioned with a cold expression. "Yes, I do. What does she have to do with this?" Nile asked, angrily. "Well, if you must know, she asked too many questions to the government." "And do you want to know what happened to her after we graduated from the cadet corps?" Erwin asked, voice betraying his cold expression. "And no, there is no way they killed her. I won't believe it," Nile said, as Pixis brought a cup of rum to the man. "Now that you are quiet, I can give you all the plans. This all works if you are in on this, Nile. They are bringing a criminal from the underground to take over the military police at the moment," Erwin said, as Nile spat out his rum. "What? I was essentially fired?" Nile asked, incredulous as Erwin nodded. "Now then, do you want to hear the plan I have in store for everything that will happen later on?" Erwin questioned as Nile finished his cup and glared at Erwin. "You have 15 minutes, Nile stated angrily as Erwin went over the plan. As the squad of Levi had moved throughout the city, they were attempting to make it outside the walls to return back to their original base within Wall Rose. But they were moving in the city as they attempted to try and catch the people after them off guard by having a small group cover for Aren and Historia. As it had looked, from what Hange had collected whilst being near the capital, Historia and Aren were being chased after again. Only this time it was an unknown person within the walls searching for them as they were hoping to bring something to happen. What the scouts knew, they couldn't find since it was heavily covered by a lot of people protecting this kind of evidence. So their plan to lure out the people who were after Aren and Historia was to have one group be moving on a cart with the fake Aren and Historia, and the real ones moving through the city without being noticed. And as Levi's current group were moving in order to catch up with the fake members of the plan, Izuku noticed some movement off to the side and kept to the shadows. He knew that they were being followed from the mere shadow that had moved as soon as he turned to look behind himself from the rooftops. Shaking his head, he looked back at Levi as the man was sitting on a nearby rooftop with his second-in-command Nifa. She was a slightly reddish-brown-haired girl with short hair, big red eyes, but had a very quiet personality from what he could know from the few times he had talked to her. Levi was watching the group as they entered the building to get the information they needed on who was the real leader of the military police at the moment. Erwin wouldn't tell him, but all he told Levi was that this person was someone who was very dangerous to his squad if they weren't careful. As he was thinking about how this wouldn't be what the military police would do in order to attain Aren and Historia, he began to have a small memory of when he was younger. And a certain face of a certain man came to his mind when this situation came to front of his memory. "Nifa, do you know about someone named Kenny Ackerman?" Levi asked, quietly. "Not that I haven't heard of him, but from what I know, he was the man who killed hundreds of military policemen in the past in the underground. Is there a reason why you are bringing this up? Nifa questioned as Levi stayed quiet for a moment. The military police would never send amateurs to do something this high stake as well as high danger. But he would, Levi thought before feeling a disturbance in the back of his mind telling him to dodge. Back behind the two members of the scouts, a man wearing a cowboy hat climbed up to the roof as he smiled underneath his hat. Pointing his weapon over at the two, he prepared to pull the trigger of his weapon when Levi cried out to his subordinate. Nifa, Levi screamed before a shot rang out. Comma 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 comma. Over with Izuku, he was keeping an eye on the wagon from far ahead of the group. He had been noticing something terribly wrong with the whole plan when he felt something like a shiver run up his spine. And that was when he heard it. Off in the distance a gunshot was heard, and he looked over to where some steam was coming up from one of the buildings and he took off towards it. He used his ODM gear in order to reach the place when he saw that literally dozens of people were up in the air aiming their weapons at his squad leader. Pulling his blades out, he thought about disarming them when a new thought came to mind. He should really focus on getting Eren and Historia out of here with his Titan form. People of Stohess, I apologize for what I'm about to do. Izuku muttered to himself before he pulled his hand up to his mouth. As soon as he bit down on his hand, all eyes went over towards him as a massive lightning strike landed in the middle of the town near the carriage. Once everyone looked in that direction, it provided the perfect distraction for Levi to escape from his predicament as he blasted his way over to the giant Titan as it reached down and grabbed Eren, Historia and the random scout into his hand and placed them onto his upper chest whilst covering them with his hands. He looked over to where the wall was located and as his Titan form looked towards Levi's current position, he found that the squad of dozens of soldiers were now after him. He overheard Levi scream at him though. Get the others, I got this, Levi yelled as Izuku's Titan nodded and ran off. Izuku was putting his all into escaping from the city so that he could make sure that Eren and Historia could remain safe and sound from the government. And as soon as he rushed through town, he felt through the vibrations in the air that he wasn't alone as multiple anchors had landed near his armor. Increasing his grip over the slots where his upper torso was protecting his pectorals, he continued to run towards the wall. Looking down at his shoulders, he found that a bunch of the soldiers with the gun-like protruding ODM gear on their shoulders were looking at him with a deadly eye. As soon as he arrived at the wall, Izuku stopped moving as the group of soldiers thought that they were intimidating him enough to hand the group over. But they weren't prepared for him to scream out for his allies to get to him, much less speak words. R-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-A- A. JJJJEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEEeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeeee Izuku's Titan form with a smirk on his face as he heard the doors of the bar open up with a kick. And whilst he was dealing with his own problems, Mikasa and Jean arrived with Armin and a few others as they saw the predicament Izuku was within. The group moved over to the wall as they climbed to the top of it as Izuku jumped in the air and using such strength to run up the wall, he got high enough to cause those riding him to fall off and use their gear to catch up to him. Once Izuku pulled his hands away from his upper chest, he used his hand to hold up the scout, Historia and Eren and tossed them lightly over to the others. As he fell backwards, he turned around and started to swat away the other soldiers who were about to give chase. RRRUUUUUUNNN. Izuku's Titan form called out to them as they took off. With his allies gone, he landed on the ground and looked at each and every soldier that was nearby. Forming a smirk from the armor on his face, Izuku started to pull his arms back as steam pushed off his body in a massive spout of energy. RAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA Rushing to the nearest body, he had grabbed them with such swiftness, they were caught off guard by his ability to be so fast. Incorporating his martial arts learned within the cadet corps, he had taken down a good third of the group before hundreds more had arrived. They all started to blast their weaponry at the armor on his skin as it bounced off or created a small crack on it. But each time it was cracked, Izuku shed them off as he increased in speed when that happened. With the faster movements he was making, he eventually had managed to completely devastate the people within the hundreds of soldiers that definitely weren't military police. Once he saw the many blood stains on the ground, Izuku turned to leave when he heard movement coming from behind his Titan. Looking back, he found that one of the groups were glaring at him with such hatred that she had also bit down on her hand. What surprised him next was how the woman, who had blonde hair, had begun to transform in front of his eyes. A smaller Titan form was created as she slowly gained a feminine feature whilst she grew to drastic proportions. Her full height was just smaller than his full height if he wasn't hunched over, but she had the feminine traits of the previous female Titan. Mostly muscle fibers as well as some slight skin over her body as Izuku's Titan form growled. Once the female Titan was fully formed, Izuku got into a combat stance as the female stared at him with full hatred. And once she rushed at him, Izuku's Titan form began to steam up to massive proportions as he climbed out of his Titan form. Walking out of the mouth, Izuku launched his anchor up towards the wall as he flew higher than the female Titan could jump. Once he was on the wall, Levi had landed next to him as he saw the female Titan back on the ground below. "I thought the female Titan was killed," Levi growled. "I thought she was too. Maybe someone had managed to feed Annie's corpse to a random person?" Izuku asked, as Levi shook his head. "Don't know, but we should leave now. Kenny was dealt with for now, but he will come back for us," Levi stated before jumping off the wall and entering the vast expanse of Wall Rose. Izuku looked back at the female Titan who growled at him with fury as she yelled at him with fury as Izuku jumped off the wall and moved into Wall Rose's territory. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel and comment down your fav part. Now we will see you in the next video.